Hey guys, this is Matt, and this is going to be my complete AJAT tutorial slash explanation, kind of combined with my own personal AJAT history. This is going to be a long video. I don't know how long it's going to be. I just started recording. I have a kind of a plan. I wrote like an outline of what I kind of want to talk about, but I have no idea how long it's going to take. You know, because you can see. I don't know, but I'm guessing I'm probably going to ramble a lot. No guarantees how this is going to turn out. I decided I'm just going to do this one take, and however it goes, that's it. I'm not going to do this again. So, yeah, so I think this is going to be the last video I ever put on my Matt vs. Japan channel, because, I mean, you'll hear later, because I'm going to explain my whole AJAT story, but I'm kind of going to graduate from AJAT. It's a very Japanese way to put it, but that's kind of what they say, you know, Sotsugyo from it. So I kind of did this. I wanted to put all my AJAT knowledge out there in some kind of format, even though like it would be cool if I could do them in all those little edited videos like I normally do, but that would just take so long, and I'm just really not down to do that. So I figured this would be better than nothing for the few of those hardcore AJATers out there who already know who I am, and you know, or maybe for AJATers in the future to come, you know, because I think there's a lot of things I've learned from my own experience that would be valuable to other people, but you can't find necessarily on the AJAT website. And yeah, it'd be a waste for it to, you know, go to waste. So yeah, here we go. So my original plan, what's still my plan right now, is to break AJAT down into, you know, 3 sections: the science of AJAT, the philosophy of AJAT, and the practice of AJAT. And then at the end, I'll talk about a few other personal additions. And so I guess in the intro, first I'll give the basics of my story. So I first got into Japanese when I was a freshman in high school. I was watching Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0 because I used to watch Yu-Gi-Oh! When I was a kid, and I used to play the card game like when I was in elementary school. I used to love that. So then I liked Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged, this other YouTube series, and then they kept talking about this show called Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0 that was only aired in Japan, and it didn't get aired here because it was too gory or gruesome or something. So I was like, oh yeah, I want to see that, I like Yu-Gi-Oh! So I downloaded that, and of course it was in Japanese with English subtitles because it never got dubbed. So I wasn't into Japanese at all, I just wanted to watch this anime. And I remember I was watching it, and I was a few episodes in, and I still remember this moment really clearly. I was lying in my bed watching it on my iPod, and there's some moment where I was like, dude, Japanese is sick. I gotta learn Japanese. It wasn't a conscious thing. It just came from somewhere really deep. It was like a lightning bolt hit me, and I was like, Japanese, and that was it. And so I remember later that day, and I mean, it was kind of weird for me because previously I used to kind of like make fun of weeaboos and kids who liked anime. And I kind of looked down on them because I thought it wasn't cool and it was lame. But in that moment, I dropped all of that. I was like, fuck that, fuck all that. I don't care about being cool. I don't care about getting made fun of for being a weeboo. I don't care. This is all that matters. This is it. And so I downloaded, you know, basic how to learn Japanese stuff. Didn't help that much. And they had Japanese classes at my school, so it was already like the middle of the term. But I like convinced the Japanese teacher to let me switch, and I said I'd like catch up by myself because I was really motivated. And then in the summer, I took classes at my community college so that I could skip the next year of Japanese. And then I also, that summer, I went to Japan for 3 weeks through like a trip in my school, and that was like really awesome. I just had a great time. It was probably like some of the most fun I've ever had in my life. I got along with my host family really well, and it was just everything I wanted it to be because I was just a tourist. I just saw the normal tourist stuff. I just saw like the toilets that have all these fancy buttons on it, and just like. And like I went to Tokyo one time and saw Akihabara, and it was just like I was like, yeah, this is where my future is, right here. Like, fuck America, don't like any of that. And I mean, in hindsight, a lot of that was me not wanting to. I mean, it was kind of like running away. It was kind of like everyone has their own problems, and I just got this. I was like young and naive. I got this idea in my head, like if I went to Japan, everything would be amazing. All my problems would be solved. And so. Yeah, I mean, some of that was probably because at that point I'd seen a lot of anime too, and of course in anime, I mean, I consciously knew that Japan wasn't like the world you see in anime, but I mean, I pretty much didn't. I pretty much just, I saw anime, I was like, yeah, this is the shit. And it wasn't a very logical thing at all, but yeah, so I came back and then I took, so I remember I had heard about AJAT at some point, like I read it, the website, I think I saw Tokyo Sam video and he was talking about it, and I read the website and I was like, okay, yeah, this all makes sense. This is really good. And I told my dad about it, and he was like, no, that's bullshit. Like, that's way too good to be true. That's just a scam. And I just knew it was true. I was like, no. And so I downloaded RTK and I started it, but you know, it wasn't, I think I started and stopped RTK a couple times, but I just couldn't get past like 50, 100 kanjis because it was so boring. And I don't even know if I was serious about immersion at that point. But I just, I knew I was going to Japan. So this was before the 3 weeks. So I knew I was going to go to Japan. And then once I was in Japan, then it would give me enough motivation to get serious about AJAT when I got back. That's what I was telling myself. It was kind of a lame excuse to not start now. But it worked. I got super motivated when I went to Japan. And I remember there was one moment when I was in Japan where I showed my host mom that video of cats, you know, the one where he's wearing the blue shirt, the classic one. And I'm like, how good is this guy? And then she she's like, yeah, if I didn't look, I would have assumed he was Japanese. And I was like, holy shit. Okay, that's it. I'm following this guy. I'm following this dude. And so when I got back, just from the day I got back, I just went all Japanese all the time. I downloaded, like, I stocked up on media. I remember there was like newspapers and stuff I brought back from Japan. I put it up all over my wall, and I already had like anime posters and stuff. I switched my computer to Japanese. I downloaded RTK and just started like going at it hardcore. So yeah, I remember, yeah, like I had Ikebukuro Skate Park. I like watched that all in one day, even though I didn't understand anything. I didn't care. And that was just like my whole life. So then school started again. And, so I was a junior now. I hope I'm not messing things up. Wait, I might have, did I just skip a year? Wait, so no, yeah, I had to have gone to Japan in between my freshman and sophomore year. So, or maybe it was between my sophomore and my junior year? Yeah. Okay, yeah, so sorry, I got the time fucked up. So, my freshman year I got into Japan and Japanese, and I took, I switched into Japanese class, and that summer, I took Japanese class at community college, and then went back, and so then I was in Japanese 3 when I was a sophomore. And then between my sophomore and junior year, that's when I went to Japan, and then I came back and started AJAT. So that was 2011, in like July is when I started AJAT. And then I went back to school, and I was in like Japanese like 5, because I went to Japan, and the teacher knew that I since I watched a lot of anime and I was just a good student, he just let me skip Japanese 4. So I was in Japanese 5 and I was doing AJAT, and so I was a junior at this point, yeah, when I started AJAT. And so I did AJAT, and so then I wanted to go to high school in Japan because, you know, I watched all this anime, and almost all of anime takes place in Japan. And so I just had this idea where it's like there is an experience of being a high schooler in Japan, and it's like a very important experience. It's what all anime characters go through. It's like the pinnacle it's like the pinnacle of life in Japan, and I wanted to be Japanese, so it was like the pinnacle of my life that I wasn't going to have. So it was like, I have to go to Japan and be a high schooler in Japan, because otherwise I'm going to graduate from high school and I'll never get to have that experience ever. And so I was just like determined to go to Japan. So I like found a program that would let me go, and yeah, did all the paperwork, got into the program, like that all worked out. So in the middle of my junior year, I left to go to Japan. So I had already been doing AJAT for 6 months at that point, and before AJAT I had taken Japanese classes, you know. So it's like I knew the basics, I wasn't totally helpless, but like in Japan, I still sucked pretty bad. Like I could have basic conversations, and the Japanese person would be like purposely talk to me like I was a baby. But when Japanese people were talking amongst themselves, I would understand like nothing. So in Japan, my host family kind of sucked. Like, she like the people who have host kids like get paid money for like they get money in order to, like, basically her plan was the program would pay her money to like prepare food and do stuff for me, and so she wanted to like, and there was like a little extra bonus, so she like wanted to spend the least amount of money as possible on me so that she could keep more of the money, because they were like really poor, and and because it was like a single mom who's like, I don't know what happened to the dad. I don't know. He probably just was never there in the host kid's life, and there were, yeah. So it was kind of tough. Like, she would never actually make me breakfast. She made me eat like kombini pan every day, and and then she would like give me like leftovers of dinner for my bento and lunch. And so and she just didn't like me. In addition to that, because it's like I had this idea in my head that it's like, so Katsumoto got fluent in Japanese after 18 months. So I had this idea in my head that I was going to replicate that identically. So I was going to be in Japan for a year. I got to Japan after 6 months of AJATing. So by the time I went home, I was going to be fluent. So, and I knew in my head, because I knew the AJAT theory really well, I knew that what I should be doing is like immersing and not trying to talk too much, and then like making a lot of flashcards. So I didn't, when she would be like, yo, what do you want to do on the weekend? Like, do you want to go out and like see some shrine, or like, do you want me to like take you to some weird thing? And I was like, no, I'm not really interested in any of that weird, of that like tourist stuff. I just want to get good at Japanese. So I kind of, if you could just leave me alone so I could just watch anime and make flashcards in my room, then that would be good. Because what I started doing was, there was like, because it took me so long to get to school and come back from school, and then I had to like spend time with my host family, I didn't have enough time to make Anki cards on the weekday. So I would like, on the weekend, I would spend like all of Saturday making a week's worth of cards. And I think sometimes it would like fall over to Sunday too. So it's like on the weekend, I didn't like when they made, it's like I didn't want to do anything on the weekend. I literally just wanted to stay home and make flashcards all day. And so my host mom was like, why the fuck did you come to Japan if you were just going to stay in your room all day? Like, you could have done that at home. And then I'm like, okay, first of all, I'm going to Japanese school all day, so I'm still doing Japanese stuff. I'm still talking to you all day, so I'm still doing Japanese stuff. And the biggest thing is, if I didn't come to Japan, I would have to be going to fucking American school all day, and then I wouldn't be able to AJAT. So it was almost like I came to Japan, not to be in Japan, but to not be in America, so that I could just I could just AJAT all day. And of course they didn't get that. They didn't get AJAT. I couldn't really explain it. She was like, yeah, like, if you want to learn Japanese, you should be hanging out with us, not on your computer. And I was like, you don't get it. And so, yeah, it went really bad with my host family. I didn't do anything. And then I didn't really make any friends either. Like, so I didn't join Bukatsu because at my school there was no Bukatsu. Actually, it's like, I brought my bass. I play bass. I brought my bass to Japan, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to join the Keonbu. Because I like saw Keon, and I was like, yeah, dude, I'm going to join a band at school. Like, live my anime main character life. But there was no Keonbu. There was only like orchestra, which there was no bass in. And I didn't want to join a sports club because I didn't want to be like doing sports all day. I wanted to be getting good at Japanese, you know? And so even though the joining club was actually mandatory, like during the program that I was on that brought me to Japan, I just ignored that. I'm like, well, fuck you. I don't want to do that. And, cause there was like, it was the only clubs besides the sports club. The sports clubs were like orchestra and like some other weird stuff that I didn't want to do. And I'm like, well, I'd rather just spend that time in the library reading. So every day after school, I would just read light novels in the library, like for like 2 or 3 hours, just sitting there, like looking. And I could barely read at that time, of course. So I was like just looking up almost every word, like trying to understand as much as I could. So I couldn't really make any real friends because I couldn't communicate with them. Like, I didn't speak Japanese. They didn't speak English. They didn't want to like take the time out to sit and like talk to me like I was a baby. And I didn't really want to do that either because it was like embarrassing for me because I had this really strong pride about how I should be good, and I didn't really even want to force output anyway. And it seemed like reading novels and watching anime was like more productive than actually talking to Japanese people, which was very true for reasons I'll explain later in terms of actually getting good. So yeah, and actually going to class like sucked because I didn't understand shit. And so I'm just sitting there listening to biology, which is basically just gibberish to me. And then biology, and then math, and then like Japanese literature and like history. And so it was just all just gibberish all day. And so I told myself like, yeah, it's still immersion. Like, you're still improving your listening skills, which I was, but it was boring as shit. And so I had them like change my schedule so that all my classes were English classes, because that was the only one I could understand, and it was kind of fun because I could actually participate, and I was like the star of the class because the teacher would always like ask me how to pronounce stuff, and he would always come and high five me, and it was pretty fun. And it's like at lunchtime for a while I would like hang out with my host brother, because it's like we were so friendly with each other because we lived together, and he was a good guy, but it was like he'd let me be in his friends group, only his friends group would be having a conversation. I couldn't follow it, so I just kind of just be sitting next to them eating their lunch. And then halfway through, I just started eating my lunch in the bathroom stall, and there's actually a word for that in Japanese, and it's like really embarrassing. But for me, I'm just like if like I would eat my bento in the bathroom stall, and I just like watch Pokemon on my iPod while doing it. So I was feeling like, and it was more fun, And so I was like really depressed most of the time I was in Japan. I was like super isolated, super lonely. And my favorite time of being in Japan was like when I would bike ride home, just looking at Japan, just like looking at the like scenery of Japan. It was like just super Japanese. There was like mountains in the background, and then like rice fields and these super Japanese houses. And then like the konbinis and like these super Japanese like buildings. It was just had that super unique like just visual look of Japan. And I remember just riding on my little chadi bike, the super Japanese bike with the basket on the top. And that was probably my favorite part of being in Japan. I remember that like really well. Like I don't remember that much of being in Japan because it's like I was really depressed. So, and I did the same thing every day. So I don't have that many like unique memories. Like the most fun part was during summer break. They like sent all the kids in my program to Nagoya to like go to this English teaching camp where we taught like Japanese middle schoolers English, and that was like super fun because I was with all these other Australian kids who were like a lot of the people in my program were Australian for some reason, but we would all just mess around and like mess around with the Japanese kids and stuff, and I was way better at Japanese than everyone else. It's like I wasn't really fluent yet, but I was still way better than them because they, I had been AJATing for like a year at that point, hardcore, and they were like doing nothing. So they pretty much still had zero Japanese ability. And so compared to them, I was really good. So I'd like purposely I'd like think of a sentence in my head that I knew was, or like a paragraph in my head, and then I like say it to the Japanese person, like purposely in front of the other Australian people, and we'd like have a conversation, and I'd like make it look like I was better than I was. I was always good at that. I'm still good at that, making it look like I'm way better than I am. So that's why Japanese people always think that I'm better than I actually am, because I'm really good at that. So I would do that, and the Australian kids would be super jealous, and my ego would be super boosted, and I'd be like, yeah, dude, I live for this. Like having other people jealous of me because I'm so cool. And so yeah, those are probably some of my best memories in Japan, but I got kind of more and more like isolated and depressed, and it got to the point where I was just like, fuck this, dude. Like I'm just it got to the point where I was AJATing, but all my input was coming from the internet and media and my iPod, not actual Japanese people. So I was like, why don't I just go home? I'm miserable. This sucks. Like I just want to be with my family. I want to stop having to put up with all this. And so I remember I just like one day in the middle of class at school, I just got up and just left and got on my bike and just came home, and that was it. And then I just called my parents, and I was like, hey, I want to come home, and they were actually super supportive. They're like, okay, come home, because they're like, there's like, yeah, the money's not coming back, we already spent it, but there's no point in just you being there being depressed. It's not like a valuable experience, so don't waste any more of your life just being depressed over there. So I came home, and for a while, I had more time to just. So it's like it was gonna be. I wasn't gonna go back to American high school because I was already like a year. Like so, I was in Japan for 6 months total. It was supposed to be 10 months. So I came back after 6 months, and so I remember, yeah, it was September, and I wasn't gonna go back to high school because if I would end up being held back because I wasn't doing any actual schooling when I was in Japan. So I went to like community college to finish high school, but there was a while before the next term started, and I had to do like placement tests and stuff. So there was a long period where I was just at home at my parents' house. I was I think 17 at this point, and And so I was really conflicted because I knew that I'd made a lot of progress in Japanese, and I could tell, like, if I kept doing this, I was going to get good. But at the same time, it was like, I had such an awful experience with Japan. And so it was like, so I was like really, really in a tight situation because I had my whole future bet on this. It's like, what am I going to do if I don't do Japanese? I already had so much of my identity, like, tied up with that. Had this story where I was going to live the rest of my life there. So, and there was a while where, and so my dad was like, well, you can just stop doing Japanese. And I knew also, there was this other portion where I was like I'm either going to get better or get worse. Like, I knew if I stopped studying Japanese, the little bit I had would just, I'd forget it so quickly. And then within like a few months or a year, then it would be pretty much all gone. And so I felt like I had all this hard work and I was like halfway there already. And it was either all or nothing. It was either I keep doing it full time and get there, or I stop and then I would just forget it all. And so I guess I didn't want to, forgetting, it's like, that was like not, forgetting it just didn't feel like an option because I was so invested in it. So for a while, I just like rewatched some of my favorite animes and like purposely forgot all my experience in Japan because I was really young. I didn't realize what I was doing, but I remember I watched my favorite anime, like Honey and Clover. This is a show that I used to love. I just watched all the best scenes from that. And I remember I was just like, no, I still love Japan. I still love Japan. Fuck, I love Japan. And I just decided that I love Japan. It was so in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have done that. I probably should have quit then. For reasons I'll say later why. But I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to face whatever I was using Japanese to run away from at that time. So I kept doing Japanese and age adding. And so now once I really got back into the groove of age adding, it was like really nice because like, it was just like being in Japan, except I wasn't in Japan anymore. So I still had all day to age at. Like, I had no responsibilities, except I was at my parents' comfy house. And it's like, I didn't have to deal with anyone I didn't like anymore. It was just super awesome. So I would just age out all day. I made all these schedules where I'd like read for an hour and then watch anime for an hour, read for an hour, and then make Anki cards. And I just did that for like another 6 months. And then I started going to community college, but that was super easy. So, just kept age adding all day. So I started getting better and better, and then I think like by the summer of like 2013 or something, I was like fluent. And I remember there was one time where there was like, I don't remember how I found it or how they contacted me, but like these Japanese people were going to come and to where I was living in Portland, Oregon, for like 2 or 3 weeks, and so. They wanted me to like guide them around downtown. You didn't have to know Japanese. It was just like people who were interested in Japan and who would be interested in this stuff. And so I like went with them. I like went and like guided them around downtown Portland for like a couple days, and they paid me to do it. It was awesome, but it was just all these just like college girls who were like all like 1 year older than me, and it was just so awesome because I was totally fluent in Japanese at that point. And that was the first time where I like realized I was fluent, because at that point I was just sitting in my room watching anime. I didn't actually talk that much, almost at all. And like I hadn't really spoke Japanese since I was in Japan, and it had been like a year and a half since then. But I was like super fluent, and I was like, holy shit, this is awesome. I can speak Japanese. And they were obviously super blown away and super impressed. And I was getting all this attention from these Japanese girls, and it was just super awesome. And so that like totally boosted my motivation, and it helped my story I was constantly telling myself of Japan is the shit. I love Japan. Totally boosted that. And then I just kept studying, kept going to community college. I did the same thing the next summer. It was also super awesome. And yeah, so then eventually after I was age adding for like 4 years, it was like, so up until then, really age out was like my entire life. It was like literally all I did. And like I still had a few, like I had one American friend who was my friend ever since middle school, and I still hang out with him every once in a while. I feel guilty while doing it because it wasn't age adding. But I mean, I still had him as a friend. And I also had like age at friends like online that I'm still good friends with. So they were actually, those are probably my most friends. Is I didn't really have any close online Japanese friends because it was really hard to make online Japanese friends because the only people that really wanted to talk to me were people who wanted to learn English, and I didn't want to teach English. And I don't know, it was never really worked out, and I didn't really have a desire to do that anyway. So So yeah, so then I finished. After I finished high school and community college, I kept all my credits I got for high school counted for college too. So I just stayed there, and then I eventually transferred into like a 4-year college to University of Oregon, and so there when I went there was like a ton of Japanese people there, like a ton of Japanese foreign exchange students. So that was like really really awesome. So I kept and also at first I was going to major in psychology and like minor in Japanese or something, but I've always hated like doing school study. Like I liked studying on my own. Like I liked studying Japanese, and at that point I had already like studied some like I was interested in philosophy and psychology, and I like had studied a lot of Japanese history. So I knew it's like if it was my own study, I could do it all day. But I didn't like when they're like, here, study this, and then I hated tests and I hated writing papers. And so I kind of realized that like majoring in psychology would really be hell for me, because I would just be so much shit I didn't want to do. And so I'm like, well, I'll just major in Japanese. Like at that point, I still thought I was going to live in Japan anyway. And so it was like, all I really need is like a degree to get over there, and then I'll do whatever there, you know? And so I figured like if I, like, in my mind, I was like mostly going to college just because I felt like I had to, because cause I had this idea in my head, like, you know, if you don't have a college degree, then you'll never go anywhere. And I mean, which is like kind of true. So I was just I went there to get my Japanese degree, and it was super easy, and it was really fun because I had that situation where I was in like I placed into already the highest level Japanese class. Like there was a placement test, and I don't know why they just told so they placed me into the 4th year class, even though it was super easy for me. I don't know why they did that. Like, well, there was nothing above it, but I don't know why they didn't tell me like, sorry, we don't. I guess they didn't want to tell me like, oh, sorry, you're too good, we don't have anything for you. So, especially because I remember the person who did the interview was like this Japanese woman who was later my counselor, and she like really hated people who were arrogant, and I was super arrogant. So she was purposely wanted to make me, she'd be like, yeah, you're okay, but you're not that good. And she would like purposely try to like put that in my face. And she wasn't impressed with me. And so I guess, yeah, she put me in the 4th year class, and that was super easy. So I was like a million years ahead of everyone else. And there was like a lot of like half Japanese people in my class, and so that was super awesome because there was like there was at one point where I was in high school when I first got into Japan. There was like this group of like half Japanese people and Japanese people whose parents had come here for work, that they just hang out in the cafeteria and speak Japanese. And I'd always want to go and join the group, but obviously I couldn't speak Japanese enough. So I was like just super jealous. And I remember there was a Japanese school that half Japanese kids and Japanese kids who were like born here would go to like every Saturday, where all day would be like a Saturday school for Japanese people, and they teach them kanji and like and Japanese math, because Japanese math is way ahead of, like, they learn like 3 years ahead of ours, so it's so that they could go to college in Japan if they wanted to. And so I remember I went to that school and I'm like, hey, can I join? And they're like, no, you're too white and too old. And so like the people in that group, like because a lot of people in my high school went to my college, so it's like some of those half Japanese kids and even Japanese kids who were born here were like in my Japanese class, and I was like better than them. So it was like super awesome because it was finally like I got my revenge, you know? It's like AJAT finally paid off. And I mean, obviously their accent was better than mine because my accent wasn't perfect, but they would still make like they would use words incorrectly, and they had a tiny vocabulary, and they sucked ass at reading kanji, and I would just own them everywhere else. And my accent was still pretty good. It was like better. And then there were like other white kids in the class who just took Japanese in high school and then took Japanese 100 level, 200, 300, 400 level, and they like really sucked ass. Like they couldn't do shit. They couldn't, like when the teacher called on them, they'd just be like, because they didn't even understand the question. And then they would turn in these awful papers that were like barely comprehensible. So I remember just thinking like, yeah, I'm just better than you in every way, which is like a really silly thing to think because it doesn't really matter. But I had I was like super egotistical at that point. So it was like finally, because it's like I spent so much time just curled up in my room. So I was finally like, yeah, okay, finally that all paid off. I showed you guys, even though no one cared. And no one even, the other thing I thought is like, no one asked like, hey, how come you're so good at Japanese? Like no one thought it was, like everyone knew I was way better. And I didn't act arrogant. I just thought it in my head. I act like really, like it wasn't a big deal. And like everyone else, so I purposely was really careful to not be arrogant. So no one So it's like they knew I was better because they'd always ask me for help, and they'd always be like really grateful when I helped them, like for their homework and their projects and stuff. But no one thought it was weird that I was way better than everyone else. Like that's still strange to me this day. How it didn't. No one's like, hey, how come you're white and you're like impossibly good at Japanese? But yeah, so I made a lot of Japanese friends, and I got to the point where there was like probably like a couple hundred Japanese exchange students at my school, and I like became famous among them because I was just like the white guy who was super good at Japanese. So I'd like meet Japanese people for the first time. Like I had this bad habit of whenever I saw a Japanese person, I had to talk to them. And I could just tell when they were Japanese. It'd be super obvious because of their fashion and their posture and the way they walked. Like I could tell whether someone was Japanese, and I could tell whether or not they were like born here or like actually from Japan, like have been here for less than a year. So whenever I saw one of those people that were like Japanese from Japan, I'd have to talk to them, and I'd always, the conversation would always be the same. That's the thing. It's like, at first, I'd always say, I'd pretend I didn't have, like, Japanese, because it would be weird to just talk to them in Japanese, because we're in America, so it'd be like, how come you know I was Japanese? So I'd be like, hey, are you Japanese? And they'd be like, say yes in, like, broken English, and I'm like, oh, I can speak Japanese, and they'd be like, really? Let me see, and then I just start switching into fluent Japanese, and they'd be, like, blown away, and they'd be like, how come you're so good at Japanese? And then it's like, so the conversation would always be the same. And I would just, oh, how come you're so good at Japanese? Like, oh, what made you want to study Japanese? Blah, 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 blah. And so since I had the same conversation, like, fucking hundreds of times, I, like, perfected it. Like, I would try every possibility, see how it went, try a different one next time, until I got to, like, the perfect formula of how to blow a Japanese person's mind, like, as much as possible. So I would just do this over and over and over many times. And it got to the point where every time I'd like get their line ID, just, I don't know why, I've never talked to them after that. Well, for most of the times. But it got to the point where I just had these million line IDs in my phone. I didn't even know who any of them was. You know, I didn't remember any of their names because I always sucked at remembering Japanese people's names. So then I'd meet them again some other time and they'd be like, oh yeah, you. And be like, hey, and they'd always ask me, they could tell. They're like, hey, remember my name? Like, you remember my name? And so I'd be like, nope. I'd be like, I mean, tell me it, like, it's gonna take me like 3 times. Like, they'll tell me it and I'll be like, okay, I'm probably gonna forget it again, but if you tell me again after that, then maybe I'll remember. But no one cared, and everyone loved me. It was really awesome. And it got to the point where I'd meet a Japanese person for the first time, and they'd be like, oh, you're the one I've heard so much about. And I'd be like, what? And they like know about me, even though I didn't know them, just because like I was rumored among them in the Japanese community. Because like these Japanese people, they were like age-adding all the time in Japan, and so they just, yeah, I mean, they wanted to learn English, but they didn't want to work. Like they had this mindset of, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to America, and then English is just gonna seep into my pores magically. So I'm like, I don't have to do any work. So they just hang out with each other, like because they couldn't speak English, so they were too afraid to make American friends, and then they just age out all day. It's like, there was this one section of like the cafeteria that they like had reserved, like not actually, but they would just always be there. Like some Japanese people would always be there. It'd be like the Japanese hangout spot. And so I'd always just go over there and hang out with them, and they'd just be like talking about Japanese news, watching like Japanese YouTube videos. Like it was just like all Japanese all the time. And so part of me was like, this is fucking awesome. And it's like on Friday nights, I'd like invite a bunch of Japanese people over to my apartment, and we'd like watch Japanese comedy on the TV and like drink and like play games, and it was really fun. It was like I felt like I was so cool because I was the only white guy in the group, and there were like other white people who were like studying Japanese, and they wanted to hang out with us because they wanted to study Japanese, and they'd hang out with us. But like at the end of the day, Japanese people like they couldn't really communicate with them. Communicating with them was like homework, you know. It was like English class or like Japanese class, like for the other guys, like trying to talk with them. And so it wasn't like they couldn't really have a real friendship, because friendship doesn't work like that. You can't really just, you need to be able to communicate. Like there's just too big of a communication barrier. And so I was the only true American person who was like broke the barrier and was like in their group. And so, I mean, from like a normal American person's point of view, I was just like this weirdo who thought I was Japanese, and so what I thought was, I'm this super cool badass guy who's the only one capable of mastering the language, and now I'm accepted by the people, and at that point I didn't care about American people at all. I was like, American people don't exist to me. I just exist to be in Japan, so I was like in the right place. But in hindsight, I probably looked pretty goofy to everyone else who like, yeah, I don't know. And then part of me was also kind of conflicted because I had this mindset of like always striving, always trying to get good at something, you know, my whole life, even if it wasn't Japanese. And so seeing these people, so in reality, since they were Japanese, if they were actually like thought the same way I did, then they wouldn't want to hang out with me because I'm fluent in Japanese and I'm not going to speak English to them. Like if the kind of Japanese person who I would respect is the kind who would stay as far away from other Japanese people as possible because he came all the way to America to learn English. So like actually, and there were a few Japanese people like that who actually like they didn't want to hang out with me because they're like, dude, you're too good at Japanese, you're not going to speak English to me. So they like purposely would avoid me, and I was like, okay, I respect you for avoiding me. And but those were a very few, and the large majority didn't even try. And so I was like, the people I was hanging out with, I didn't really like as people. I kind of actually looked down on them because I'm like, you guys came all the way to America, and all you're doing is like Snapchatting people in Japan, you haven't learned a word of English, and you're not going to learn a word of English, and then you're gonna go back to Japan, and then you're probably gonna act like a big hotshot who thinks they're cool because they know all about American culture, when in reality you know nothing about American culture. So I was like looking down on them, but at the same time, I liked speaking Japanese to them because I liked speaking Japanese, so I just kept hanging out with them. So I started to feel more and more conflicted. Like, I actually don't like any of my friends. Why am I doing this? And then I eventually got to the point where I was like, fuck these people, they're retarded. Like, I'm just, and it's not like Japanese people are retarded. It's like the kind of Japanese people who come to my college and then only hang out with each other. So it's like my specific friend group is retarded, and so I eventually went back to just being a hermit, AJATer, and I only really talked to my other AJAT friends, and yeah, but I kept studying. At that point, it was like I kind of like, it's like I could already read. Like I wanted to always be kind of increasing my knowledge, so I started to read older and older novels, and I would be like making a ton of Anki cards, and my vocabulary was getting like crazy big, and then I eventually I started studying classical Japanese, and I studied more of Japanese history because I felt like I had this idea in my head that I wanted to 100% master Japanese, like 100%. So in order to do that, I wanted to, so since Japanese comes from classical Japanese, it evolved over time. Then in order to really understand it 100%, I was going to have to understand all of classical Japanese so that I could understand how exactly it evolved. And I was also going to have to understand Japanese history because that was like so much, they were so interconnected, you know? And I was even planning on studying Chinese, like for the sake of Japanese, because Japanese is so influenced by Chinese, and they used to write in like classical Chinese, like in Japan. So I was going to learn modern Mandarin, and then I was going to learn classical Chinese in Mandarin. It's just so I could like complete the Japanese language, like 100% complete it. And so I was like working on that, which at that point I was like so deep in this hole where it was like it was like completely unpractical. Like, because none of that knowledge is going to do anything. It was just for the sake of being good at Japanese, because I just had this idea in my head that it's like, that's my job as an AJATer, is to get as good at Japanese as possible. And there would be every once in a while, and so in addition to that, yeah, so I was like learning all these super obscure words, and I had all this really obscure knowledge about the etymology of words. And so it got to the point where I was like correcting my Japanese friends' speech all the time, because they'd use a word wrong, or they'd be like, or sometimes I'd just ask a random question, like how come we say like blah 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 blah, like how come this word came to mean this, and I'd like know the answer, and they'd be like, what the fuck? And then okay, my favorite thing that would happen was they'd like try to test me, like especially this would happen when someone first is starting to get to know me. Japanese people, like, they just have this idea that gaijin suck, which is true, they should have that, because most gaijin do suck, but they'd like use a word, and then they'd correct them. Then they use like a kind of hard, difficult, or rare word, and then they'd like rephrase it in an easier way, assuming that I wouldn't understand that. And I was like, dude, I understand that first word. And they'd be like, oh, what? And they'd be like, how much do you understand? And I was like, and I just say it. I mean, like, dude, I probably know more words than you, like literally. Like, I can probably read more kanji than you. And then they'd test me. They'd call up all the hardest kanji that they could think of, and then I'd read it all. And also, I learned I wasn't very good at writing kanji by hand, but whenever you say, I can write any kanji, they either ask you to write bara or demo. So I purposely memorized just those two words, and then they'd be like, okay, write. I'd say I can write any kanji. Then say, okay, write bara, and then I do it. And then they'd be, okay, write lemon, and then I do that, and they'd be like, they'd be like, wow, he can write any kanji. So that was what I was talking about when I mastered making people think I'm better than I am. That's one aspect of that. But also, so then they'd look up on the internet like hard words, hard kanji to read, and then I'd read all those, and then they'd just be like, holy shit. And then they'd start like calling their other Japanese friends over just to explain to them how crazy this was, because it just blew their mind, because they have this idea, right, that gaijin are never going to be able to learn Japanese. It's like Japanese people's brain is built differently so they can understand Japanese, and it's just impossible for gaijin. So just the fact that I existed, and also that I had never really been to Japan. It's like I'd explained that, yeah, I lived in Japan for 6 months, but I didn't actually get fluent until I was already here. And it would just like, they couldn't accept it. And I try to explain to them, I'm like, yeah, dude, if I can learn English, if I can learn Japanese in America, then not only can you learn English like in Japan, but you're fucking in America, so you should probably be like, I started explaining to them how I did it, and then and it all makes sense to them. And some of them would be like, okay, starting tomorrow, I'm gonna do a lot of listening with no subtitles, because it's like there is thing is like, how do I make my listening skills better? I can't understand shit. And I was like, okay, well, listen a lot, like watch a lot of TV shows, and I was like, I do that. I'm like, do you use subtitles? And they'd be like, yeah. I'd be like, well, fucking don't do that. And they're like, but then I can't understand. I'd be like, yeah, that's the whole fucking point. So, but none of them would do it because they didn't have any motivation. And I realized that earlier on, and I stopped seriously lecturing them about AJAT. Like at first, I would give a lot of AJAT lectures, but I just dropped that early on. I'd be like, yeah, just listen a lot. Like I just like say really, really random tekito things. I'd be yeah, just read a lot, listen a lot, and that was it. And then they'd be satisfied with that too. So, and I mean, it's the same thing with American people. I give them when I first got into AJAT, I would give AJAT lectures to everyone, like every language learner, and they didn't take it well. They were a few people would be like, oh, I get it, okay, I'll do that, and then they would not do it, and then most people would be like, no, you're crazy, it doesn't work, because they were too stuck in their little hole. But I'll talk about that later when I actually talk about AJAT. Holy shit, this is gonna be a long ass video. You should probably watch this in parts. Like, don't try to watch this all at once. Maybe watch like 5 minutes a day for a year or something. So yeah, I mean, coming to the end of my AJAT journey. So I guess at this point, I've been AJATing for about 5 years, and it got to this point where I was really not comparing. It was like I used to think I was really. I at one point I thought I was really good at Japanese because I was comparing myself to other gaijin, and I was really good compared to all other gaijin. I was god level. But then I crossed this point where I started comparing myself to native speakers, and then I suddenly started to realize how much I still had, like how much longer I had to go, and I started to feel like I sucked. Like one day I thought I was like god level, and I woke up one day and I was like, holy shit, I still fucking suck. So Japanese people, like, you know, when Japanese people, you talk to them, they're like, oh, you're so good at Japanese, you're so good, and then you have to be like, oh, no, I'm not, because that's like the rules, you know, it's Kenso, and you're not allowed, you have to deny compliments. It's just a rule. Ichiro has to say, no, he's not that good at baseball, it's just how it works. So, I would always do that, but there was one point where I would do that, and in my head, I would be like, yeah, but actually, I'm fucking amazing. I'd be like, no, I'm not that good yet. And then be like, but actually I am. But then one day it just became the truth. They're like, well, actually I suck. I'm not actually that good yet. And then be like, oh no, oh, you know how to Kenson too. Like that would make them even more impressed because they'd be like, oh wow, you understand our culture, you get it. But I was like, no, dude, I'm not even Kensoning, I'm actually serious. But yeah, and so things started to be a little less fun when I really started to like realize how far I had to go and thinking I was going to have to do that. And the biggest thing was pronunciation, because it's like I never worked at my pronunciation consciously. I just immersed a lot and then spoke, and then I knew I sounded pretty good because I'd always get a lot of compliments on it. And I know I just didn't, when I listened back to my voice, it just didn't have that gaijin sound, that like boku wa konnichiwa desu. It just didn't have that sound to it that most people do. So I just figured, like, I thought that early on, I was really naive. In my early AJAT career, I literally thought I would just sound like a native with no effort one day. I'd be like, yeah, I don't yet, but one day I'm just gonna, if I just keep AJATing, I'm gonna start sounding like a native. no effort involved. Because that's kind of what Katz made it sound like. And that's what he says happened to him. But, I mean, we know Katz actually doesn't sound 100% native. He's better than me, but he doesn't, like, 9 out of 10 Japanese people say he sounds really good but not native. So I started realizing that my pronunciation kind of hadn't improved in a long time. It kind of, like, hit a point and then stopped improving. And so I really started wondering, like, what about in my pronunciation is it that's wrong? And I realized that's when I started getting into pitch accent, and I realized that I pretty much hadn't acquired a lot of pitch accent, like, and I kind of realized that, like, when I hear Japanese, my brain doesn't listen for pitch accent, and it was never going to start listening for pitch accent if I just at this point. So I realized, like, if I just kept just doing what I was doing, my accent was never gonna. It would probably get better still, but it was never gonna become perfect because I was never going to acquire this last aspect of pitch accent. And so I started, like, looking into pitch accent. I started studying a lot, and I learned a lot about it, and I started creating all these crazy theories about how I could, because when you just have the conscious knowledge of it, it doesn't affect how you actually speak. That's like HAT 101. But so I came up with all these crazy theories how I could, like, somehow teach force my mind to acquire it, and I came up with some pretty good stuff that I never ended up doing, but I still think they work. Maybe I'll talk about them later, or that there's a good chance that they would work. But and then also, like I know there was a lot of holes in my Japanese just to the fact that like for example, I didn't know how to talk about math in Japanese because I learned math in English. I didn't learn math in Japanese, and I didn't know how to talk about. I didn't know the name of dinosaurs in Japanese because it never came up in my immersion. And it just got to the point where I realized there's so many little things that you learn just growing up as a native speaker that I didn't know. And it's like, even if I could memorize them with the SRS, but when you just have an SRS card for something and you don't really have constant exposure to it, it's like, it's different. It's like Japanese, like I can see a Tyrannosaurus Rex and go, that's Tyrannosaurus Rex, and it's just like really automatic in English, you know, but it's like if I just memorized that word in Japanese, it would be more like I'd have to like really recall it at that time. In the rare situation where I actually want to say that, I'd have to like recall it, and I'd know it. If it came up in a book, I would recognize it, and I'd know, oh yeah, it's T-Rex, but it's really just not the same. And I realized like I kind of had this realization, like if I actually want to get native level, it's seriously not fucking possible unless I actually lived in Japan, probably for a long time. And so I was planning on going to Japan still at that point. But, yeah, so I guess, and then so at this point I had, and my theory about, or my plan to learn all of classical Japanese, I already knew that was going to take me at least 10 years or longer. And I also, so at this point I started wanting to really, I wanted to learn Chinese, like Mandarin, Chinese, I don't know, Chinese. I always switch how I say it. But, like, I already knew I was going to learn Mandarin for multiple reasons. One, or the biggest one, is because that's what Katz did. That's AJAT, right? You learn Japanese, then you learn Chinese. Like, that's just AJAT. And so, like, you gotta be at least trilingual, right? That's what I thought. And the second part was that the more I understood Japanese, the more I understood that it's like literally half Chinese. So if you really want to understand Japanese 100%, you need to know Chinese. So that was another part of it. And part of it was I loved kanji. The idea that there was this language that was all kanji was pretty sweet. And plus, there's just, you have the Japanese and Chinese, just kind of seems like a set, you know? It's like, yeah, I can speak Japanese and Chinese. Just, I don't know. And then part of me just wanted to learn another language because at that point, I realized that the most fun part of AJAT was actually like right around when I first came back from Japan, where I understood a lot, but there was still a lot I didn't know. So I could just fucking watch Sword Art Online. I could understand and follow the plot, but I could also get like 30 flashcards in every episode. So there was this perfect balance of I was always improving, but I still understood a lot. And so AJATing was just so fun because it was fun immersing. It was fun getting better, and I could feel myself grow so fast because I got to that point where I had enough where learning more was easy. So at the beginning, it's not that fun. You don't know anything. But then when you get too good, it stops being fun too, because it wasn't like I was good enough where I could say, okay, I finished Japanese. Done. Next one. Tsugiwa. because, like I said, there were so many little tiny holes, so many little problems, so much more to go. But all that little stuff wasn't really fun because you couldn't feel it. Like it's like you do the work, but you have to do so much work for the littlest gain, you know. And it's like at that point I did so many cards that repping was really a pain in the ass, and that would like always be. It was like I have to spend like pretty much 2 hours repping every single day, in addition to my college work. So that would always, I just know every day it kind of sucked having to wake up to that. And so I started doing Chinese just because it was like Japanese itself was so boring, and I felt really guilty about it, and I knew that really it was a bad choice because you can't learn 2 languages at the same time. It doesn't work like that, you know? And so it's like, if I really wanted to keep my Japanese moving, I was really going to have to put all my effort into it, but I didn't want to do that. And so I figured like, okay, I'll do Japanese and I'll do Chinese at the same time, because I don't know, I wanted to do it so bad because I always missed my old golden AJAT days, and I just thought like, dude, if I started Chinese, it'd be so easy. I already know the kanji. A lot of the readings of things are actually really similar from Japanese, you know. A lot of the grammar is actually built into Japanese too. So it'd be like an American person learning Spanish or an English speaker learning Spanish. So it was going to be so easy for me. And I downloaded all this anime and like dubbed in Chinese, and just listening to it, you know. It's like I realized that like familiarity is very interrelated to how much you like something. So it's like, when you listen to a language a lot, you want to start to know what it means. It's really natural. It's like, that's why, you know, like if someone lives in a community with a lot of other languages, they'll tend to with a lot of people who speak a certain language, they'll get interested in that language. It's just really natural because you just start hearing a lot, and it starts to sound kind of beautiful. Even like, at first I thought Mandarin sounded like obnoxious, and I know a lot of people do, but the more I listened to it, the more it started to sound kind of cool. And more just this deep desire to be like, dude, I want to understand this. It wasn't even I want to speak it. It was just, dude, I want to understand it. That was enough. Because for me, AJAT was always about understanding. You know, it was always focus on input, focus on understanding. Outputting will come later. And I had this idea in my head that it's like it was going to get to a point where I would be done. I would put conscious effort into outputting. Like I would have people correct my speech and stuff, but I never ended up actually having to do that, because it just came naturally. And it also got to the point where I wasn't even interested in doing that. It's like I didn't really even care about being good at speaking, because in my mind I always measured myself with how much I could understand and how well I could understand. And it was like I was never done with that. So it never got to that point where I could say, okay, done. I understand everything. Done with input. Time for output. It was always, you know, more. So. And I guess yeah. So I kept starting Chinese, and then realizing like, okay, just learn 2 languages at the same time. Two languages at the same time is impossible. I quit, and I repeated that like 5 times, like because I'd quit, and then I'd just be like, and then a few months later I'd be like, man, if only I didn't quit Chinese, I would be like this good by now. I'd have this many cards, I know this many words, and so then I'd start and be like, okay, this time I'm not gonna quit, even if I only can do a little bit a day, even if all I can do is a little bit of listening and make a few cards, and that's it. It's still going to build up over time, and like, I don't know, I had this really, really naive way of thinking, and so I was kept starting and stopping over the course of a year, but I was still getting better at Japanese, but I started to have more and more complaints about Japan, I'd always be complaining about my Japanese friends, for reasons I explained, and I'd say like, yeah, I know it's just cause, you know, these are the type of Japanese people who come to America, right? So they're the kind of people who like, so they were always thought America was so cool just because it was America, and they like neglect Japan in ways, but at the same time they wouldn't make the effort to get good at English, and then at the end of the day they'd be doing Japanese stuff. So they seemed really contradictory, and they seemed like pussies who couldn't actually do anything. And it just annoyed me how they thought America was cool just because it was America. So I knew that it was like, it's not that all Japanese people are like this. It's like the Japanese people who come to America are like this. So I tried to tell myself that, but there were a lot of things just about them that I could tell wasn't, that they were like specifically Japanese traits that I didn't really like. Like part of it was just that I mean, a lot of it was that they never totally accepted me 100% as one of them. It's like they let me hang out with them, and they thought I was cool. But in my mind, I mean, in their mind, I wasn't Japanese. I wasn't American either. That's the thing. It's like, I was this nothing. It's like, because I understood them too much. And, because it's like, one thing you have to know about Japanese people is the Japanese like, Japan purposely puts up a certain mask to show foreigners. They have they have an image that they create because they want to look a certain way to foreigners. And that's what you see in anime, and that's what you see when you go on tourist trips, and when everything that makes it over here, like Heri Pamu Pamu, and like all that stuff is what Japan wants you to think it is. You know, it doesn't really. So like the real Japan, where it's like almost like after college you become a salary. If you're a guy, you become a salaryman, most likely, and then you just do nothing but work until you die. And if you're a woman, then you pretty much have to get married by the time you're 30. Otherwise, you're a failure in life. And then you have to have a kid, and then your life is just sitting at home taking care of kids all day. And there's kind of this like kind of darker reality of Japan that I saw directly when I was in Japan. But and so, and there's also just like, so I don't know. So it's like, yeah. So Japanese people have this face they put up for foreigners, and so when I would see it happen. The Japanese people, when they talk to American people, they would like, their personality would change almost, and it'd be like, and the things they say and the way they think would be really different. And then when they talk to each other, they'd say totally different stuff, and so. And it's that they have this really strong. I think it's really hard for American people to understand this because it just doesn't exist here. Japanese people have this like connection with other Japanese people, where it's like they think they're a different brand of human, and it's like they really just feel that they're different than everyone else who's not Japanese. And Japanese people are almost like all their brothers just for the fact they're Japanese. It's like they'll fight with each other, you know, and it'll be like Tokyo people and Kansai people will like will like fight with each other about who's better. But at the end of the day, they're all Japanese people, and they're not, and it's like that's what really bonds them. And so it's like they would really never, like they were. I started to realize more and more that I was never going to be a Japanese person ever. Like, no matter how fucking hard I tried, no matter how good I got at Japanese, no matter how Japanese I acted. Just for the fact that I'm not Japanese, like on paper, I'm never going to be. Like I have this face, and I grew up in America. I'm not Japanese. I'm never going to be, and they're never going to treat me like that. And so the thing was, they didn't treat me like they treated the other foreigners, but they didn't really treat me Japanese either, because I was neither. I was neither to them. I was this weird halfway thing, and so I always was like weirdly isolated within their community. Like, and it started to kind of to bug me more and more. Like, this is bullshit. Why am I hanging out with these people who it's like, why am I hanging out in this group when I'm not part of it? It's like, I started to question it more and more. It's like, why am I so fucking obsessed with these people? Why am I dedicating my life to be with these people? Because it was really like, I was dedicating my life for Japanese people, because I was dedicating my life to Japanese, and the only people who speak Japanese are Japanese people. And I thought I wanted to go to Japan. And so I hadn't really questioned it before, like in that same way. Like, really, it's like, why? What is it about these people? What's so good about them? What do they have that we don't have here? Because it's like, I was never going to be one of them, so why am I even trying? And even if I could become one of them, why would that even be desirable? Like, why would I even want that? And I had no answer to that. I felt like I had no choice, because it's like, well, I'm already came fucking this far. What am I going to, like... I feel like I had no choice. Like, I didn't know what else to do. And, I liked studying Japanese. I liked the Japanese language itself. But I started to become more and more aware of the fact that I didn't like Japanese culture. And I didn't really like Japanese people. I mean, there were Japanese people I liked, but it's like, if you took the most archetypal Japanese person, like, the thing is, yeah, it's not good to stereotype, but Japanese people are much more similar to themselves than American people are similar to themselves. Like, there are very many common traits within them. And sometimes it's not necessarily that they're actually like that deep down. It's just the fact that since there's such a strong emphasis on acting within the societal norms in their culture, they act a certain way because it's almost like those are what the rules say. So I didn't like the rules, and so I didn't like the people who were following the rules, and so I didn't like the most archetypal Japanese person, and so I kind of became more and more aware of that. And I guess part of the other thing is like I also knew that part of me always still wanted to be special, you know, and I knew that in Japan, even though I wouldn't be one of them, I'd be special, like because I wasn't one of them. And I would get like free passes, and people would be kind of interested in me, and it's like part of me still liked the being specialness, even though it was because of that I was also isolated. It was kind of contradictory, but I almost felt like if I was in America, I'd be like the opposite of special. And so since I already had this idea in my head where I was going to go to Japan and be special, it's like I couldn't accept the idea of going back to being a normal, not special person just in America at that point. Because I was really so deep in a hole. I really had tunnel vision. I really didn't see everything else. But so yeah, because I started to get more and more conflicted. In that aspect. And I guess in the end, I mean, it slowly got more and more to the point where I just realized like it's not. I just kind of finally let go. I realized it wasn't what I wanted. Finally, you know, it's like I realized that living in Japan wouldn't be. At first I realized I didn't want to live in Japan. That was the easiest thing. Like I was set to study abroad in Japan again as a college student at Meiji University. Actually, I would be leaving right now if I was still going. And at first I realized I didn't want to go because I realized I didn't want to go to Japan because I wouldn't want to be a gaijin in Japan. Like I guess I was already felt like I was a gaijin here because I was like in all my friends were Japanese. I was in this community, and I realized it was kind of just going to be the same thing in Japan. And I knew it's like, well, yeah, I mean, I could find a few close friends who accepted me for who I am and stuff. But I can do that here too. It's like, why do I need to go to Japan to find a few friends? I can find American people that can be my friend, you know. And I started making more American friends even for the first time since I started AJAT. And I just realized like the kind of people I can get along, like if you took 100 Japanese people, 100 American people, the kind of people I could really get along with, there'd be way more in the American group than the Japanese group. Just because I'm American. It's like I didn't want to admit it for the longest time, but my personality is pretty American. I'm American. And there was this other kind of aspect where when I speak Japanese, my personality totally changes. It's like everyone tells me, like maybe I have a video of me speaking Japanese, maybe you can tell from watching that. My personality totally changes. I become kind of more timid and less confident. And it's not just that, it's just I'm more Japanesey. Like Japanese people have this very distinct like kind of mannerisms and timidness, and I didn't do that on purpose. It just happened. And so like Japanese people will tell me, and this used to piss me off all the time, but they tell me all the time like they hear me speak English, like so that I'd be speaking Japanese, and they're used to hearing me speak Japanese, and then I'll speak in English, and they'll be like, "Whoa, you sound so cool when you speak English." I'd be like, "What? I don't sound cool when I speak Japanese?" And they're like, "Yeah, you don't sound cool when you speak Japanese. You sound cute." And I was like, and I could tell it wasn't the kind of cute you wanted to be. It wasn't the kawaii you wanted to be. It was like, so that would really piss me off. And it kind of got to the point where I realized like Japanese people have this obsession with gaijin, you know, with like American people. They think they're cool. They like they almost view them as a celebrity just for the fact that they're a white person. And so it's like they would since I was so good at Japanese, they could, because you know, it's like the fact that they're some special celebrity is just an illusion, right? They're just normal people. Just Japanese people project onto them. It's like for them, their whole life, the only white people they saw were movie stars like Tom Cruise. So they just have this projection of like, wow, this is the same type of person as Tom Cruise. Damn. Because they just grew up in an environment with only Japanese people. So the fact that I was this good at Japanese broke that illusion. Like, because they could tell I was just a normal person. And so they wouldn't think that they didn't think I was super cool, almost at all. Like, and it kind of like pissed me off. It's like I would meet a Japanese person, and I started occasionally pretending I couldn't speak Japanese, because there were things I could do that way that I couldn't do if I spoke Japanese. You know, like you can get away with anything with a Japanese person. Like you can be really rude, or you can be really perverted. You can do crazy shit, and as long as you're a gaijin, they just let you, and they just laugh and smile, and they're happy to be in that position. But if once I speak Japanese, I've just become that nothing thing again. And so it's like I realized like it all started to kind of make sense. Like all the stories I've heard of gaijin in Japan, where it's like all the people that I knew of that went to Japan and really tried to assimilate ended up giving up and coming back. And the only people that seemed to really stick in Japan for a long time, of course there's exceptions, but most of the people were the people who gave up who didn't even care about assimilating. You know, like Tokyo Salmon and people like that. Like, not to hate, but I mean, not that it's a bad thing, you know? It's like, but they're not trying to become Japanese at all. They're like totally embracing their gaijin-ness. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be a gaijin in Japan. And when I really realized that that was what I was going to be when I went to Japan. I wasn't going to be a Japanese person. I was going to be this weird gaijin who's not even really a gaijin, you know? Who was like this weird nothing thing. And I lost interest. And also it's like and so the other thing is, like, I could only interact with Japan through media, right? So like whenever I went on Japanese YouTube, it was all shit. It's still all shit. And so I was like, wow, Japanese people like this shit? Like, this is what Japanese people like? Like, I don't know about that, man. And it's like, I'd watch Japanese variety shows, and there was some funny stuff, but it'd be really weird and really kind of like not that funny. Like their comedy was like, they have a lot of slapstick and like the kind of stuff that maybe like you'd find funny in elementary school. And it was just like really like, wow, this is weird. Like, everyone actually watches this shit? And I don't know. And so, and it wasn't like America's any better. That's not what I'm saying. But I had this story in my head where it's like, I already thought I knew I didn't like any of America, you know? I knew that if you turn on the TV in America, it would be shit. And it's like, I knew that 9 out of 10 American people I wouldn't like. But I had this story that Japan was different. And once I woke up to the reality that it was no different, but in a way worse for me because I wasn't one of them. It's like, if I was actually Japanese, then maybe it would be no better or worse for the most part. Maybe, you know, it'd have its own worst parts, because then I'd be expected to be a salaryman, and there's all these other cultural things that I don't like, you know, like where when something's wrong, you just pretend that everything's okay, and you never really deal with your problems head on, you know, and all the things I don't like. But it was like it's like, even if I was Japanese, it'd have its own problems, but I'm not even Japanese, so yeah, it was like, why would I want to go there? I had no reason anymore for this, except for the fact that then I could use my Japanese, which I realized wasn't a reason. So yeah, and so then for some reason I was still studying Japanese hardcore, because I didn't know what else to do. But I eventually slowly kind of slowed down more and more. I started to be interested in a lot of different stuff, and then it got to the point where I had totally lost interest in Japanese. Like there was nothing I could immerse in that I literally that I cared about, because it's just my interests were in other places. They were just in things that I couldn't find in Japanese, and so it's like immersing was just such a chore, because it's like, okay, you have to do listening and you have to do reading. In my mind, it was SRS, listening, and reading was my AJATing, because I'd already totally finished hanging around with Japanese people at that point. And so for listening, there was seriously nothing. It was like there was no anime I wanted to watch. There was no drama I wanted to watch. Like Japanese live action TV shows out of the question. All the podcasts I could find were of like nothing that interested me. And so that was really, I would like just force myself to watch drama and stuff, and it was a chore. And there was stuff to read. in Japanese, but it was like lower quality than its English equivalent. Like the thing of not that all of it is, but the stuff that I wanted to read, this content I was interested in, it was like translation stuff or just like lower quality stuff that was natively Japanese. And so I felt it's like, why am I reading a worse version when I could be reading a better version? And so part of me just wanted to stop immersing, but what was all holding it together was the SRS, because I had this huge deck, all my knowledge was encapsulated in it, and it took me like 2 hours to rep every day, and I felt like if I stopped immersing, then repping would get even harder, because it's like if I started getting because it's like repping was already really hard. Like I had to wake up and do it first thing in the morning when my brain was like on full throttle, otherwise I couldn't get through it, because I had these crazy cards where I would force myself to recall not only what the sentence means, but what the etymology of the word, like how the word and like all the different meanings it has and how it meant those different things over time and why. And so it was like such a brain workout to rep. It was really a chore. I never deleted any cards, no matter how much I hated them. And so I felt like if my Japanese got even a little rusty due to lack of immersion, then repping would get even harder. And so I felt like I had to immerse just because part of me wanted to just be like, okay, well I'll just rep, and because that way I'll maintain all my vocabulary and everything. But then it just got to the point where I was like, this is causing me so much pain every day. Like just knowing that every single fucking day I have to do reps for 2 hours. Like every single day. Like I could never go on vacation. I could never just go camping and not worry about it. And it's like every time I stayed up late, I would be thinking the whole time, like, oh my god, tomorrow's going to suck ass because my sleep schedule's going to get fucked up. Then I'm not going to be able to do my reps. And then I'm going to get behind. And then getting behind took me like cooking a week to catch up when I got behind. And it was just always such a pain in the ass. So I just realized that it's like, it's not worth it. And so then I just stopped. And then it was free. Then things were great after that. So, I mean, now I have pretty much... I don't know what I'm going to do about Japanese. I mean, I still watch stuff occasionally. Like, I've been watching some Japanese movies and some drama occasionally. And I'm, like, reading occasionally. But I don't know, I'm really not motivated to do anything that has to do anything with Japan. Because, like, for me, just the fact that I'm this good, like, there's this word in Japanese, mottainai. Or sekkaku nanenai. And I always fucking hated those. I remember when I was in Japan, they'd say, sekkaku nihon ni kita nagara. You should, like, you came all the way to Japan, so you might as well go see all those shrines. It would be a waste. It would be a waste for you to stay home on your computer all day. And I would be like, fuck you. I came here to get good at Japanese, and that's what I'm going to do. So, and it's totally different now. It's a different situation. But Japanese people say to me, like you're this good at Japanese, so it would be a waste if you didn't do something in Japanese. I'd be like, well, I mean, I don't want to do that. I'm not interested in doing that. So it'd be a waste of my life if I did do it. It doesn't matter that I'm this good at Japanese or not. You know, like it doesn't seem like a reason to me to do something related to Japan, even though just because I got as good at Japanese, if you know what I mean. And also, there's this other kind of thing where I've had such a love-hate relationship with Japan, you know? I really have. To the point where a lot of me, like, sometimes I just think about Japan, where I just think about Japanese stuff, and part of me just goes, ugh, no, not that again. I've, like, scarred myself. So, like, part of me, like, it's not that doing Japanese is neutral. It's actually, like I'm traumatized a little bit. So, I mean, it's kind of complicated because at the same time I have this amazing ability, but at the end of the day, you know, I'm not nearly as good at, like, it's like sometimes, like the other day I talked to this Japanese lady, and like this random Japanese lady that I ran into at, like, on the street, and we were talking for a while, and she asked me how good I was at speaking English, she assuming that I wasn't going to be very good at English because I was so fluent in Japanese. I don't know what, she was an old lady. I don't know what was going through her head, but I was like, I mean, not that she had lost it or anything, but it was almost like, because for her, you know, she came to America late in age, and never really mastered English. So in her mind, it's either like you're a master at one language and you suck at the other one. So to her, I was so good at Japanese, she assumed that that was the one I had mastered and I must suck at English. And even though she obviously didn't logically think it through, but it just made me realize that, wow, I'm that good at not that I'm that good, but I appear to be that good to a Japanese person, because I'm really good at sounding good. It's like, when I'm speaking, it's kind of like it's not the same as speaking English. Like, I remember reading in my psychology textbook that for second language learners, the part of your brain that does the listening is the same as your native language, but the part that does the speaking is a little bit different part. And I almost feel like that's true, because, I mean, when I'm listening, it just converts directly into meaning. And when I'm speaking, it's not that I have to translate. Like, my thoughts aren't in English. They go directly from nothing into Japanese, but it's almost like I'm like putting together like building blocks in my head. It's not before I speak. I can do it in real time, but it's very effortful, and it's very like, I have to be very careful when I'm doing it. It's almost, it's like I have to make sure as I go that it's correct. It's like there's a little moment right before everything I say, just like a fraction of a second, where I like monitor it and make sure, like, yep, good to go. And, or it's like, or when I want to say something, like, possibilities will pop up, like, you could say this or this or this, and I have to, like, well, this one sounds the best. And, when I'm speaking English, I don't do any of that. It's just, like, right now, I'm completely not thinking about the language or the words. It's like 100% of my brain is just going to content. But when I'm speaking Japanese, there's always, like, 20% of my brain worried with the language itself, and I can only use 80% of my brain to focus on content. And so when I do this, when I use 20% of my brain to focus on Japanese, the result is very good. Like, it comes out very natural. So from someone who didn't know what was my subjective experience, for all they know, the appearance is that it's the same as English. I mean, my pronunciation isn't as good. Occasionally I'll have a grammatical mistake. When I make it, I know I make it. But it's very close to maybe native level sounding, and like not besides the accent, right? It's like there's like you could probably think of an English speaker who has an accent, but besides the accent, he's native level for the most part. It's like I probably appeared like that, but my subjective experience was very different. It was very fake. It was like I felt like I was faking it, and that feeling of faking it never went away, no matter how much I spoke, and it was always. And so it was really annoying, and I got to a point where there's a part of speaking Japanese that's fun, because it feels like a game, It's like, how good can I be? When I say something clever, I feel satisfied, And when Japanese people are impressed, that's cool. And so when I'm speaking English, there's nothing of that. So it's more fun in a way, but it's also less useful and less convenient, and yeah, it's very, and I mean, I don't like to, well, now I don't really care. But before I would never admit this to people. I would just act as if, or I would say that, yeah, English, I can speak Japanese pretty much as well as I can speak English. And Japanese people would believe me that, like, Japanese people would ask me all the time, is it easier for you to speak Japanese or you to speak English? So just the fact that they have to ask that tells you that you sound pretty good to them. And so I would pull it off. It's like, well, English is a little easier, but I mean, pretty close. Like, I'd even say it depends on the content, which is partly true. So it's like on things like Japanese history, where all the words are in Japanese, it's like impossible for me to talk about it in English. So I don't know the English. I don't know what they use for all the nouns. But I mean, for the most part, speaking English is way fucking easier. And so, but I'd pull it off, I'd be like, yeah, they're about the same, blah, 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 blah. But, so I wouldn't like to admit that really, my subjective experience is that I still suck at Japanese, It's like, I know objectively I don't suck, right? But I know that when I think what it must feel like for a native speaking the Japanese language, it doesn't feel anything like what it feels like for me. Like, because I know for them it feels like how I'm speaking English, but me speaking English and me speaking Japanese doesn't feel the same. And I suspect that if I really went to Japan and lived in Japan for multiple years, then maybe that would get better and go, and maybe it would even partially go away. But it's really hard to imagine. Like, the other thing is pronunciation too, right? Like, if I slip up on my pronunciation. I have to like try to enunciate things to make sure my pronunciation is good, and it like fluctuates. It's like the harder I try, I can make my pronunciation better by trying harder, you know. And so the less I try, then the worse it gets. To the point where if I don't try at all, then I'll just be like, "Oh, boku wa matto desu, konnichiwa," and it's like easier to talk like that actually. And so, like in English, obviously my pronunciation is 100% perfect no matter how little I try. So, always from the pronunciation point of view too, it's like Japanese takes a lot more effort. I'm a lot more error prone, so I always have to be on the lookout. And I mean, obviously, and there's also things where depending on the content, like if I'm talking about, like say things that Japanese people talk about a lot, like how much, like everyday things like the weather or what you ate for lunch or like your tests, like things that I've heard talked about a lot of times, then it's not that bad. But if I like learn, if there's like a concept, like when I got really into meditation for the first time, I would like read all about it in English because there's like no Japanese resources that don't suck. And then I was trying to explain it to my Japanese friends, but it was just so hard to put it into words because you know how, I mean, this is something I'll talk about later if I get there. But for everything you want to say, there's an exact way to say it. And so if you don't know that way, then your only choice is to create new language, which will pretty much guarantee that you'll be awkward and wrong. So I didn't know how Japanese people talk about meditation because I've never heard Japanese people talk about meditation. And to a degree, say that if there was like a new concept, right, that never got invented, then the first Japanese person to talk about it does have to make up new Japanese, but it quickly becomes the norm, you know. But I didn't feel like I had the same making up sense as them. So it's like, not only does a Japanese person, so it's like, say there was a Japanese person who heard about meditation for the first time. How would he talk about it, even if he didn't know the other way? He still has this kind of like predictive ability that was better than mine. And so it was really hard for me to talk about things that I hadn't heard many times talked about in Japanese before. And I could still do it. Like, I would do it and they'd get it, but I could tell that I sounded way worse than usual. It's like I sounded really like a foreigner. I was like really stumbling. And I hated that. And it took me a while to realize how much my ability fluctuated depending on the topic I was talking about. So I'd be like, wow, I suck at Japanese today. Like, what happened? Like, wow. And then the next day I'd be talking about something else that I talked a lot about, and then I'd be really good. I'd be like, wait, what? Oh, no, I don't suck. I'm really good. And it took me a while to realize that my ability depended a lot on what I was talking about. And that's probably true in English too, to some degree, but I still feel like my fumbling ability is better in English than it is in Japanese. I guess at the end of the day, I feel like in English I'm saying what I want to say, and when I'm speaking Japanese, I'm saying what I can say that's closest to what I want to say. And Katz tells you to say that you should do that, and that is a very good recipe for sounding very good. But my subjective experience was it felt inhibiting. And so I think if I went to Japan, that would have gotten better, but it never would have totally gone away, is my prediction. And also, I think that's probably true for Katsumoto, for him too, that he feels a similar way. Like, I doubt Japanese is as effortless for him as it is as speaking English is. And but I don't think he'll admit that, because that goes against the whole philosophy of the site, which is you can become native level in a language by doing this. And so then again, so it's like my input to output ratio is very extreme. It's like 9-1. So maybe if I actually outputted more, that would go away. That's a possibility. So I can't say anything for that there, but inputting alone, I'm certain will never get you to the point where it's as easy for you to speak as your native language. I mean, it's kind of common sense. Like, you need to an extent where you need to practice speaking to get good at speaking. like even when I go a week without speaking English, it's really hard to speak English when I come back. For like when I do it for the first time in a week, and it's happened to me many times. So if you've never spoken a language at length, like for many hours ever, you're never gonna be able to without first going through that period of getting used to it. So yeah, now that I explained that to you, I don't know how much you want to still hear my advice, but I still think there's a lot of things that I think would be helpful for people with regards to AJAT, because I think, I've been doing this is my life for a while. I just discovered a lot of stuff. I've never met anyway, so I guess to conclude my life story, I'm pretty much done with Japanese for now. I think that since I've spent so many hours, probably over 10,000 hours with Japanese, it's pretty ingrained to the point where I don't think my ability, like, I'll get rusty, but I don't think I'm really ever going to forget it, at least not within the next couple of years. Like, I don't think I'll seriously start forgetting. And, because there is kind of an aspect of, when I'm speaking Japanese, there is kind of it is just kind of there automatic. It's kind of like it kind of contradicts what I said before, but like I spoke Japanese the other day for the first time in a while, and it was like, I kind of noticed more that a lot of my knowledge is conscious. Like everything that was in my SRS is conscious knowledge, but the stuff that actually matters, like when you're in a conversation, conscious knowledge doesn't do anything. And so the fact that I'm able to have conversations and sound good enough to convince Japanese people that I'm like almost native level, like that's all really pretty ingrained pretty deeply. So even if it gets rusty, I'll always be able to bring it back pretty quickly if I want to. And so I'm kind of done. Like before I had this mindset of I had to had like a daily quota of immersion I had to do to maintain my ability, but I kind of threw that away. I'm not immersing very much, and I'm accepting the fact my Japanese ability is going to fall. But I don't think it's really going anywhere, so that's why I'm not really worried about it. But yeah, I just have my interests are in other places now. So that's why I made that video today of me speaking Japanese to kind of encapsulate me in my prime. I don't sound that good in that video. I don't know if that was my prime, because that was like the first time I spoke Japanese in a week. My pronunciation, it's probably not usually better than that, but I can hear faults in it. So, I spent a lot of time trying to correct my pronunciation, but it makes me think that it's like whenever I hear myself, a recording of myself speaking Japanese, I can hear so many faults. So it makes me think like, if I just corrected all the faults I can hear myself, then maybe that would probably be close to perfection. Because I was always thinking of the matter of whether the fault is in my tongue or if the fault's in my ear. But I'll get onto that later. Maybe. So, well, if you got this far in the video, you definitely already know a lot about AJAT. So, it doesn't really make sense to explain the basics. But I guess I'll kind of just go quickly through them anyway. So AJAT and common sense. So obviously AJAT goes totally against common sense. And in terms of when you ask someone, hey, how should I learn a language? They'll tell you, go to take classes, buy a textbook, and then go to the country. And go to the country is like the last resort, where it's like if you, you won't get native level if you're taking classes, but you'll get pretty fluent. And then if you go to the country, then you'll magically get fluent just by being in the atmosphere. And so, and then in addition to that, the best way to get good at speaking is by speaking. So all those are totally wrong. Now, the reason why people don't realize this is wrong is I think first of all, people don't even check. But even when people think they're checking, it's like I'll get people, I'll try to explain why classes are bad, and then someone will say, okay, well my cousin took Spanish in high school, and now he's fluent. I've heard him speak. He's fluent. So I think what's going on there is something I call the Fluency Illusion, where basically, if someone speaks a language and they're talking fast and they don't and they seem to be successfully communicating with someone, you kind of just assume unconsciously that they're very skilled and fluent, and you don't realize that since you don't understand the language, you don't know how good their grammar is, you don't know if they're using vocabulary correctly, you don't know how good their pronunciation is, you don't know, for all you know, the other person could really be struggling to understand what they're even saying, and the other person could be not understanding what the native speaker is saying and misinterpreting it. So you don't know if that's going on or not. So that guy who's fluent in Spanish, that girl's cousin, he's probably actually not very good, but she didn't realize that. She just assumed that he was good because there's a very convincing illusion of, oh look, he's fluent. So if people really went and tried to empirically verify whether the methods that are considered common sense worked or not, then they would find that they don't. It'd be very easy to prove. Just take people who've done the methods and then ask a native speaker how good they are, and they'll tell you not very good. But people don't even bother to ask this because people don't question common sense in the first place. They're like, why would it be common sense if it's wrong? It's common sense because it's right. Which is, I mean, kind of understandable, but naive at the same time. And so, and I mean, it also, the other side of it is the people that actually do it, right? I don't think they realize how bad they are, because they don't compare themselves to native speakers. They have this assumption, like, once they've been language learning for a while, they'll be like, okay, I see how this works. There's native speakers, and then there's second language learners, and there's a huge gap between them. So I'm never, after someone who's taken classes for a couple of years, it's not conscious, but at some point, it just becomes obvious to them that they're never even going to get close to being a native speaker. And that's not even the goal, because that's unrealistic. That's like trying to grow wings or something. So instead, they're just like, okay, if I can just somehow communicate, have like basic conversations, then that's good. That's the limit. And of course, the people who aren't satisfied with this, who for some reason really want to get fluent, then they go to the country, and some of them in the country, they'll either give up because it doesn't work, or some of them will age out unknowingly. Like if you're in a country and there's no one who speaks your language, you gotta kind of sink or swim. Like you'll figure something out. And so some intelligent people, without knowing about really the theory of AJAT, will get good after many years of living in a country. Or a lot of people end up learning how to read, because learning how to read is easier than learning how to speak well. But at the end of the day, all the people that get good got good because they're following AJAT methods, whether they know it or not. It's like, and so you get to this tricky situation where there's people who got good, but they don't know why they got good. Like, because, the basic AJAT philosophy is you learn from input, not from output. So there's people who were speaking with natives a lot, right? And so they were getting a lot of input from the natives, but they were also speaking a lot. Because it was a both-way transaction. So to them, they know they got good, but they think it's because they were speaking a lot. They don't realize that the speaking was actually not helping them at all. It was that they were hearing the language a lot that made them get good. So it's also tricky that just my advice that I give, that you should take advice from someone who's actually good, doesn't even necessarily hold, because they might not necessarily know how they got good. But yeah, that is tricky. I don't know how you can do with that. But I mean, I guess look for multiple sources. Anyway, I mean, AJAT seems to work. It's pretty clear that AJAT works. That I mean, I guess at the end of the day, even if the advice is wrong, it may still work, because if he says talk to people a lot, even if he doesn't know why that works, it worked for him. So I mean, if someone got good, even if he doesn't know why, if you completely replicate the situation, you can expect the same result. So I mean, even if in some way AJAT theory is wrong, but the practice of AJAT leads to the correct result, but we're just misinterpreting why something worked. I mean, it's possible, but it seems unlikely, and either way it doesn't really matter, because the result is what really matters. But I mean, when you really hear the theory, it really makes a lot of sense. So I guess that was kind of all about why like common sense is wrong. And I mean, the metaphor I like to use is the flat Earth. Like a long time ago, everyone thought the Earth was flat. Then someone figured out that it was round, and it said, "Hey guys, check it out, the Earth's actually round." And they're like, "No, dude, you're retarded." And then they made fun of him. And now we all know the Earth is round. So I think the same thing is going on with language learning right now. Everyone thinks you learn language by going to classes and speaking to yourself in the mirror a lot, when in reality you learn languages through a comprehensible input, and you don't really, speaking doesn't really matter. But the only people that know that are me and whoever's watching this video, and I mean the other age-adders. Most of the world doesn't know that yet, but in the future probably everyone will. So one other thing I wanted to talk about in the intro is that kind of the value of learning language, and that Katsumoto talks about this, that languages are like knives, they're tools, and so if your knife isn't sharp, it's just a hunk of metal, it has no value. So the same thing I think you can say about language learning, where if you're shitty at a language, it's really useless, because there's really nothing you can do with it. Nothing you can cut with it. And so, I mean, I experienced this even though I'm this good, right? Like, there has been points where I just felt like it was annoying speaking Japanese because it wasn't as effortless as speaking English. And same with like reading and writing and stuff. So it's like because you have to realize that a language is not a means in and of it. It's like a means to do something else. It's not an end in itself. So you can never just language. You have to do something in a language. You know, you're speaking Japanese because there's a message you want to get across to someone. So the message is the point, not the Japanese. So anytime you're doing anything that involves language, you know, you're doing it for a reason. You're doing it to accomplish a task. So if you're thinking about learning a language, right? You already have a native language, and this is especially true if it's English, right? English is a very convenient language. Everything's in English, and many people understand English, and you're also very good at it. So unless you're close to native level in Japanese, why would you choose to do something in Japanese rather than English? You know, it's like if you only understood 50% of anime when you watch it raw, but you understood 100% when you watch it with English subtitles, why would you watch it raw? You know, you're not going to. It doesn't make sense. So when you really take this to the extreme, it's kind of true where there's almost no point in learning language unless you're going to learn it to 100%. Like, I know a lot of people will disagree with that, but I don't think they really get it. Like even like just being conversational, right? It's like, what's that going to do for you? Because it's not fun to talk to someone who's only conversational in a language. You have to, it's like communicating is takes a lot of effort. You have to talk easy. You have to make sure they're understanding you. You have to try to understand them because they speak in grammar, like their grammar's messed up and their pronunciation sucks. And it's overall just a big pain in the ass. It's not fun for anyone. And you're not going to be able to understand very much. It's going to be frustrating not being able to fully comprehend things. Like, I mean, if you're living in the country, you know, and then you learn how to read signs, then yeah, it's going to help you. But I mean, in the long run, it's really no point unless you're planning on taking it to the end. So, in a way, learning language is an all or nothing thing, and going all is a huge commitment. Like that's like a 10,000 hours, right? So, and it's not like those 10,000 hours are going to suck the whole time. Like most of them, I was really enjoying myself, had a good time, right? But you have to be willing to always make the choice to do it in Japanese, you know, to not watch the newest American movie, to not hang out with your friends, to not watch football, you have to be willing to make that choice every single time. And you guys should know that up front, you know, that if you're going to half-ass it, you're going to get nowhere, and then you're just wasting your time. So you might as well not start. And then another thing about people starting AJAT, this really only applies to beginners, like people starting off, but you're going to need faith, because at the beginning, you know, the beginning is the most boring part, just immersion in kanji, and you understand nothing. So yeah, dude, that's fucking boring and it sucks. And it's really easy to say, like, how is this going to work? Like, I'm just learning. I don't actually know how to read these kanji. All I know is this English word. I'm not understanding anything. How is this going to help? I mean, the whole thing just starts to seem kind of crazy at times for most people, I think. And that's why most people quit at RTK. Most people don't make it past RTK. And I think a lot of this is just because they didn't realize the commitment. Like I said before, they didn't realize that, oh, this isn't all fun and games. Like, this is a lot of work, and I don't even want to learn Japanese that bad. I mean, most people who set out to learn Japanese are like me when I was a freshman, right? They don't really know anything about Japan. I doubt anyone watching this video really knows a lot about Japan. Like you know what you know from anime and from the internet, but you don't know what Japan's really like, or what Japanese people are really like, because you have to remember the anime is almost the opposite of real Japan. Like, in Japan, anime is not cool. It's just as bad as being an otaku, like here, right? And so the only people that watch anime in Japan are outcast weirdos. And so the only people that go on to make anime are the people who used to watch anime, which are outcast weirdos. And so they make a world where then the outcast weirdos thrive. That's the whole point. It's fantasy where the people who are losers in reality thrive because it's made by the losers. So we watch this and say, wow, dude, this is the shit, dude. But you have to understand that by nature, it's the opposite of how Japan actually is. So if you think anime is cool, then you're probably not going to like Japan that much. And it takes a lot of people go to Japan and realize that. And, I did. And then I had to realize it again. So I was really stubborn. But most of the people who start AJAT, I think they just think it's cool. Like, first of all, you probably don't like your home country very much. And so you're naturally inclined to look outside, look elsewhere. And then you see Japan, and it just seems like this super cool, exotic place. And anime is cool, and you think, like, wow, like, what if I could understand anime, dude? That'd be so cool. Like, this is such an adventure. It seems so exotic. You like it because it's exotic. I liked it because it was exotic. But when it stops being exotic, and you just see it for what it is, and it's normal, like, once it becomes normal to you, then it's really not that great. And I don't know anyone who has got to the point I am at where it's like, oh, yeah, you get fluent, you see it all, and you still think it's really all that great and special. So, I mean, not that I'm saying you shouldn't study Japanese, which I kind of am, but I mean, I'm super biased, right? I'm super biased. I tell you, my life. So don't listen to that. But yeah, so I would say that the beginning hurdle is the biggest. The first section is the biggest thing. You're going to need a lot of faith. And so I'm hoping maybe just the fact that I'm telling you this, that you're going to have doubts, and you're going to have to learn to see the doubts and have, a good dose of, evidence-based faith, because, this video is evidence, Katsumoto's evidence, there's other people making videos. So you have good reason to have faith. It's not blind. You're going to need a lot. And, yeah, so that was my super long intro. Hopefully the other parts won't be that long. This video's really long. So first, the science of AJAT. This is good. I already talked a lot about it. So yeah, the science of AJAT is input hypothesis and the SRS. So I just made a video on the input hypothesis, so I won't go into detail about that. I'll just remind you that, yeah, so this is based in science. I mean, it's a hypothesis, but it's based in science, and it's been proved. I mean, I've lived it. Many other people have lived it. Where you learn from comprehensible input. You can't, to some degree it's common sense that you can't get better at speaking from speaking, because you can only say what you know how to say. And there's a specific way of saying everything. So for example, in English, we say, I need to go to the bathroom. But in Japanese, if you were going to literally translate what they say, I want to go to the bathroom. So there's no matter how many grammar rules you know, you wouldn't be able to tell that unless you already knew the exact way that American people say that they need to go to the bathroom. So basically, no matter what you want to say, there's one right way to say it, and every other way is wrong. And if you don't already know that one right way, then you're probably going to get it wrong. And so when you think about the input hypothesis, at one side, it's really obvious because, if you don't know something, you can't, your brain isn't hooked up to the internet. You're screwed. But in another way, it's just it's hard for people to accept that, the only way to learn a language, well, first of all, what people think is that, well, so just to accept that you never lose the ability that babies have to naturally acquire languages. I mean, certain aspects of it aren't as sharp. Like, I think accent is something that you never acquire as well. But when it comes to grammar and vocabulary, you're just on par with a baby, maybe even better. Especially when it comes to vocab. And so you learn language unconsciously. You can't feel it when it's happening. You might not be aware after it's happened. And not only that, but not only does that work, but that's the only way, because there's this gap between conscious knowledge and unconscious knowledge. And they don't really seep into each other, at least when it comes to language, right? Like knowledge about grammar rules never seeps into the unconscious part of your brain that like puts sentences together when you're just talking, you know? So it doesn't matter how many grammar rules you know, because it's literally not going to help you at all when you're just having a conversation, because your brain doesn't work fast enough to consciously go through grammar rules. And second of all, like, if you know anything about linguistics, you'll know that even linguistics, like linguists are still arguing about each other about the details of grammar rules. Like, they haven't figured it out yet. Like, they're so complicated that, like, even the top, the leading people in the world haven't figured it out yet. Yet somehow our unconscious mind is so wired to learn language, like, that, it's capable of doing all this without us even being aware. I mean, like, our brains know, babies, even from the time you're born, your brain knows language apart from other sounds. It knows when it hears like a siren or rain or something, it knows it's not language, and when it hears language, it knows it's language. And there's some part of your brain that instantly starts decoding the second it starts hearing. I mean, and that's why listening, like blind listening at the very beginning, helps, right? Because your brain just, as soon as it hears language, it starts getting to work on trying to decode it, trying to figure out the patterns. And so that's hard for people to accept. And also what it comes from that is that there's never any excuse to make a mistake ever, because you should only be saying things that you are certain are correct because you've heard it said by another native speaker. So for example, if you heard a native speaker say, "I need to go to the bathroom," then you know that that's correct because the native speaker said it. So you should only be saying things that you are 100% certain are correct because you've heard a native speaker say that exact thing. And if you do that, then theoretically, you should never make a mistake. Now, of course, it doesn't go this well in reality. I think I have a video on that. But that should be your principle. And the reason why is because forcing output can lead to bad habits. So obviously, if you're not doing this, then it's highly likely that you'll make a mistake because language is so exact. And if you make a mistake, every time you say something, it makes it more likely you'll say it again. So you'll say it once, and then you'll say it again, and then by the time you said it 3 times, it's already a habit of yours, and your brain already produces this incorrect thing regularly whenever you're trying to speak, and it's very hard to undo that. And even if so what normal people think, right, is, okay, I'll make a lot of mistakes, and then I'll get corrected, and then I'll be good. But remember, when you're speaking, and you're really into the conversation, right, if you're a total beginner, it's all conscious, but once you start to internalize mistakes, right, they're coming from somewhere deeper than just conscious knowledge. And so when you're correcting it, that's all conscious. So again, there's that gap between conscious and unconscious. So even though if you have a knowledge of a grammar rule, what's going to happen is you're going to be speaking, you're going to almost say a mistake, then you're going to catch yourself and correct it, and then you can say correct, right? But that process is never going to stop repeating itself. It's never going to come out correct. It's always going to come out wrong and then get corrected, and then you're going to say it. And this is why there's people who like, I remember reading this article about that this American Chinese woman was talking about her mom, who can like read like super hard novels in English that she couldn't read, yet she still makes basic grammar mistakes like it's 5 cents, even though she can write English perfectly, right? It's like she knows that she should put an S at the end, but that's conscious knowledge. And unless she's constantly trying to filter what she's saying, which is impossible if you're deep in a conversation or to do all the time, then you're fucked, because the unconscious model of the language is inaccurate. It has the error in it. So the only way to truly avoid this and to not get into the sticky situation where you fucked yourself from forcing input and internalizing mistakes is to not do that in the first place. To start out only correct. And this is mostly anti-moon theory. But in my case, it worked, and I know people where they fucked themselves. Like, I know, like a lot of people will say like "sugoi dayo," and which is grammatically correct, and they'll just do that forever until like they'll get pretty fluent, and they'll still be making those mistakes. It's kind of sad to see. And so there's the invite hypothesis. Then the SRS. Feels weird I'd have to explain this, but spaced repetition system is this. There are these flashcard programs that, so basically some Polish guy created an algorithm for the human memory that basically is incorporated into this program, so the program can tell you exactly when you should review things, so that you never forget them and you're spending the least possible time reviewing. So basically, if you were going to learn something, then there'd be a given time before you forget it. So every piece of information in your head has a date on it until you forget it. No information in your head is immortal. So, like, if you take your name, for example, so if you didn't review your name, you never heard your name, you never recalled your name for like 300 years, you would forget it. Now, because you're not going to live 300 years, basically you're never going to forget it, because the life of the knowledge is longer than the life of you. But if you were immortal, it's possible to forget. Is basically the theory. So, when you first learn a piece of knowledge, its life is probably from like 1 day to a week. And then, so the best time to review something in order to expand the life as long as possible is right before you forget it. So say you were going to forget on the 7th day. If you review it on the 6th day, then that will grow to 2 weeks. And then if you do it right before that, then it'll go to a month and 2 months, and it grows exponentially. So this program keeps track of that. You make your own flashcards, and then it tells you when to review them, so that you never forget anything. And you can choose. So basically, the default, I think, is like 90% recall rate. But if you can set it to have a higher average recall rate, but that's going to make for more reviews. So yeah, so this is revolutionary, because I mean, language is a memory game, and this way you can continually grow your knowledge without having to worry about forgetting anything. So this is really big. So that's I always used Anki. Katsumoto has his own SRS. I don't know anyone who uses it. It's really ghetto. I don't know anyone who uses Super Memo because it's really ghetto and hard to use. Anki is free, and it's on Syncs, and it's multiple platforms. And I don't know why you would use something that's not Anki. So then the philosophy of AJET is, I have a bunch of bullet points here. So the first one I wrote down is, the rule is anything that's by natives for natives is good, because 90% of all Japanese is pretty much the same. It's just the idea that, like, whether it's Star Trek or, you know, a political debate, or like a Harry Potter book, or anything, 90% of it, or maybe that's a rough estimate by Katz, is just the same particles, the same basic vocab here, there, now, later. And the last 10% is the little, you know, specialty words like muggle, or you know, lawyer. I don't know. That's a pretty common word, but you see the idea. So the important thing is that it's by natives for natives, which means it's real. So nothing made for foreigners, and definitely nothing by foreigners. That's kind of obvious. But you don't want to be dealing like with stuff that's like been dumbed down to make it easier for foreigners to read, because it's not real. And you want to, you know, we don't, like, this is a lot of things Kat said in that one interview with Tokyo Same, right? Like, we don't, like censor words we think are difficult on TV shows for kids because we think they won't understand it, right? We just speak normally and they figure it out. So you treat yourself the same. And then one other interesting concept is that you don't have to have real friends that speak the language, or real people. Like, people say, oh, there's no Japanese people where I live. Well, it's not a problem, because we have the internet. And in fact, the internet is better than real people, and I'll explain why. So when you're having a conversation with someone, you know, a conversation goes both ways. So since you suck at the language, it's really hard to, and even when you're fluent in the language, I think this is still mostly the case, even for native speakers, right? When you have a conversation with someone, you're not totally engaged in what the other person's saying, because you're thinking about what you're going to say next. And so you're still listening, but part of your brain is going to what you're going to say next, and sometimes you do pretty much stop listening. And so this is even more the case when you're not fluent in the language. And so, since what's important is input, right? Hypothesis, input is everything. quality and quantity of your input is a function of the quality and quantity of your the quality and quantity of your output is a function of the quantity and quality of your input. So your input's getting you should watch my new video if you haven't seen it yet. I talk about, when you're talking to someone, the quality of the input is very low because you're not even paying attention to it. You're paying attention to what you're going to say next because it takes you a long time to form your sentences. And also, real people aren't around all the time. You know, they have their own lives. They can't have them just stand next to you talking all the time. So, like I said, even when I was in Japan, most of my immersion came from the internet. And the cool thing about the internet is you can customize it to you. You don't have to watch or listen to anything you don't like. You just find all the stuff you like and then listen to that all the time. And it's pretty ideal because it's all input. You don't have to take the output out. So it's actually pretty perfect. And then what matters is and so also about not whether you're in the country or not, right? Like it totally doesn't matter, and it's maybe even be better for you to not be in the country for the first couple of years. Because then you don't have to force output. I talked about how dangerous it is to force output. That's also part of the reason why friends are bad. You don't want to force output. You also, if you're in a country, you're going to have to be forced. You're going to be put in situations where you have to force output, which isn't good. And so, if you're in your own country, you can just, when you're taking care of business, it'll be in your native language, and then you can spend all your time immersing in getting input in the language. And so, and just like I said, like my Japanese friends when I was at college. They were pretty much, they managed to not learn a word of English while being in America for a year. So, I mean, if they can avoid English while being in America, so can you. You can. They lived in Japan in America, so can you. And so yeah, I wouldn't. It's definitely not a down, not a negative, maybe even positive. And then what I have next is that it has to be fun. So you have to make the process fun. So I think that this is mostly true. Kat talks a lot about this, basically just because it's so many hours. And really, honestly, no human has that good willpower. Like, our willpower stock's very limited. And so, I mean, we have to exert some willpower, right, to, like, make the initial decision. Like, say you're tempted to watch an American movie, and you say, no, I'm going to watch a Japanese movie. Like, yeah, you had to use a little willpower there. But if the Japanese movie you put on is boring to you, then you have to use willpower every single minute of the movie, which is not, your willpower isn't going to last that long. I don't care who you are. So you have to like the movie so that the willpower is only required to get there. And it's kind of a general principle. And so I mean, habit runs a lot of AJAT. I mean, you have to, once you build these habits, it's automatic, It doesn't even really matter whether it's fun or not. Once you really have the habits in place. It just becomes normal. If you're just so used to only doing things in Japanese and the thought to do something in English doesn't occur to you, then you're pretty safe, even if things are not as fun for a certain day. But especially at the beginning, this is going to be tough. Because, I mean, at the beginning, you're gonna have to, it's not going to be fun, all fun, but it's important to try to make it as fun as possible. Like some bad habits a lot of people have, I was always like this, was I'd start a book, and the book would get really boring halfway through, but I would keep reading it just because I hated stopping things halfway. The same thing with anime. I would always try to finish every anime I started, and this was always this never did me any good, because then I would be in the middle of an anime I didn't really like, and then I just watched less anime because I felt like I couldn't start a new anime, but I didn't want to watch the one I was watching. Same thing with books. I would end up reading less because I didn't want to read the book I was reading, but I couldn't start a new book. So really, there's no point in giving a fuck about that. If something's boring, my new rule was once I started, so what would happen was I'd be having this argument in my head, like, dude, this is boring, maybe I should drop it. Yeah, but no, maybe it'll get exciting again, and plus I want to finish it. And then I just repeat it over. No, it's really boring again. So I made this new rule where the second I start having that conversation, then I have to drop it. The second I start contemplating the possibility of dropping it, it's too late. I'm dropping it. And that was a good rule to employ, because there's infinite books out there. You're not going to read them all anyway, so just don't waste your time with something that's boring. Like, what's important is that you're doing stuff in Japanese, not that you're finishing books. And so then again, why most of the AJAT website is motivational stuff, like telling you stuff like this, like how to get over procrastination, how to do this. And the reason why that's the case is because that's what trips people up. Like the theory, the other stuff, the science, and the practice, I'm going to say, it's like the stuff you actually have to do is very simple and straightforward. People get that. The problem is they can't get themselves to actually do it. They know what to do, but they can't get themselves to do it. So when cats first started AJAT, people didn't even know what to do. They thought that they should go to classes. So it was all about, the science and the practice. But once that so then people started to get the point. Well, some people, the people that were on that website, but then they're still struggling, because even if they knew what they had to do, they couldn't get themselves to do it. And so that's why so much of AJAT is motivational stuff, is because it doesn't matter if you know what to do if you can't get yourself to do it. And so this was never really a problem with me. I have friends that struggled a lot with this, but most of that motivational stuff is worthy to read. I have kind of a different theory that has to do with willpower that I'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, and one other thing about that is, I have that video about how to have fun. I think that's pretty relevant, whereas the way you enjoy things is fundamentally different than the way you enjoyed things when you're in your native language. So you got to kind of pick that up. You got to learn how to make it feel like it's a game, and be worried about, and take enjoyment in improving, not in enjoying the media that's in front of you. But yeah, most people, a lot of people in our society maybe haven't worked on one thing for one long-term project that spans multiple years. A lot of people start stuff and quit stuff, and they're not really used to getting over the initial period where you're doing a lot of work but not yet seeing returns. So, if you get tempted to quit, I would kind of keep that in mind, that you're just reinforcing your habit of being a quitter. And on the other side, if you don't quit, then you'll be reinforcing not being a quitter. And then the next time you want to quit something, you'll remember it's like, well, I wanted to quit Japanese, but then I didn't do it, and then I got good. So, for me, I know a lot of times the fact that I've gotten this good at Japanese is a big confidence for me when I'm doing other things. And whenever I'm struggling, I just remember that I kind of have this confidence that as long as I don't quit, I'll figure it out. Because I've done Japanese, something that a lot of people never figured out. So I recommend having that mindset. So then the practice of AJAT. So this is how to put the principles into reality. Is obviously the concept is everything in Japanese. Everything in Japanese. All Japanese all the time. So this you take this to the extreme as much as you can. So what I did is I had a little iPod, this big iPod Nano with a screen, and so what I had set up for a while is I had a folder full of anime that I wanted to watch, and then every time I finished an episode, I'd put it into the folder next to it of anime I'd already watched. And at the end of the week, I'd use subs to SRS to take out the audio of all the anime, and then put it on my iPod. And then for the next week, I'd have this little iPod that had headphones coming out, and I just always have headphones failing out of my shirt. And whenever I had even a second, I'd get up to go to the bathroom, before I get up, I'd put in one headphone in, and then I'd go. And so these would be dangling out in that iPod. I'd never pause it. I'd just keep it playing the whole time. And listening to anime that I'd already seen once was fun, because it's I could picture I knew what was going on in the scene because I'd already seen it once. So even if it was out of context, I could still know what was going on, because it was entertaining. Plus you get repetition, which is important in AJAT. When you're learning, watching the same thing twice is probably more beneficial in most cases than watching two different things, because you just get more chances to pick it up, and so it ends up being very you learn a lot, but it's also boring. So you always have this balance of making sure it doesn't get too boring, but do as much repetition as you can of the same stuff. So it's so that was a good way to keep that balance, because it was just passive listening, it was while I was cooking, while I was walking around. So it wasn't I was just sitting down and being fully attentive, because when you're trying to sit down and actually watch the same anime episode twice, it's really boring and pretty much impossible. But, it's as long as it's just background stuff, you can listen to the same thing over and over and over, and it's not bad at all. So that was always really nice. And it was nice to have an iPod that was separate from my phone, just because, then you don't have to worry about the battery, you don't have to worry about plugging in and plugging back out. It's just always there on its own thing. And it's really easy to keep it going, because it's all about momentum. And so then, passive listening matters, a lot. Like even if you're not paying attention to it, it's still helping you, believe it or not. Like, it might sound weird, but apparently there's like studies and stuff that showing this is true. But I mean, anyone who's age-added knows it's true from experience. So I would recommend really trying it for a long time before you throw it away. And but then with regards to that, so then there's a few things I don't really agree with, or I have an interesting take on with Katz. So I mean, Katz said he ate cake with chopsticks, and he listened while he was asleep, and he says you should do that too. And he also listened to a lot of music. So in my opinion, eating cake with chopsticks isn't really going to do anything. Like, I get that it's part of just staying in the mood of Japanese all the time, but I mean, it's not going to help you directly. And listening like while you sleep, like, it might be better than nothing, but it's not going to do you too much. And so if you're the kind of person who can't sleep listening to stuff, I wouldn't like try to force yourself to learn how to sleep with stuff on, because I mean, it's gonna make such a tiny difference. And at the end of the day, if you're not getting quality sleep, then that's gonna do you way more harm than listening while you're sleeping is gonna do you good. So I mean, use common sense. You know, it's like, it's not all or nothing. Like you gotta use your common sense. On the other hand, like Kat says, listening to music is good, but I think listening to music is like not gonna help you very much. Like, music doesn't sound anything like actual talking does. And I know, at least in my case personally, when I'm listening to music, I don't listen to the lyrics. I just listen to the like the beat and the rhythm and the melody. So I just knew instinctively that listening to Japanese music would be the same as listening to nothing, because I wasn't going to learn any Japanese. So it's, in that case, it's similar to eating cake with chopsticks, right? Where it's like, it's not actually going to do you anything in reality. It's just helping you stay in the mood and helping you stay like out of English land, because that is hard, and that is has benefit in itself, just the fact that you're completely avoiding English land. But anytime you're listening to music, if you were listening to, say, anime, you would be making more progress. Like, that's much higher. That goes into the quality of input, right? Is the quality of the content of input. That music is perhaps better than nothing, but very low quality when there are higher quality things. So I mean, so I would just kind of not do music. I would say that's really lame and cheap, and ripping yourself off. Grow some balls and just listen to anime all day, would be my personal opinion. So that has to do with immersion, right? Like, that's the basis. Immersion is your base before you really start anything. And it is important. I have a feeling a lot of people neglect this. But the important stuff is the stuff you can't see. It's like, you can put posters all over your wall, but what really matters is like that there's always Japanese coming into your ear, whether you have like a radio that's always playing, or like you have the headphones always sticking out. And also, I would recommend getting an iPad, because then it's not only nice for watching, because you don't want to always be watching stuff on a laptop or computer. It's not comfortable. It's kind of nice when you can just lie on your couch and just watch it. And also, it's really nice for reading, because you can get infinite books, novels, and manga on the internet. And the iPad screen is really nice, so it almost feels like reading from paper, whereas reading on a laptop is really a bitch, especially when it's Japanese and there's kanji that are pixelated. So, so the next is RTK. So yeah, some people skip kanji, some people try to do sentences in kanji at the same time. Don't do that. But what I will say is you should learn hiragana and katakana first. Kat says you should do it later. It doesn't make any sense to me, because it's only going to take you a week to learn hiragana and katakana, but it's going to take you months to learn kanji. So if you spend that 1 week first, then the whole time that you're doing kanji, you can practice hiragana and katakana, because since you're immersing, you'll see it all the time. So you might as well get it out of the way, because it takes a while even after you learn it to actually get fluent in reading it, when it comes automatic. So you might as well learn it first. So you can start that process of really internalizing hiragana and katakana instead of because you'll have all that time to practice, like naturally, even without trying, because it'll be everywhere you look. So it really doesn't make sense to me that you would do that after. And then do RTK. Make your own kanji deck. Like, don't use a pre-made decks, just because it's really tempting to do a shitty job. Like every time you make a kanji, learn a kanji, you want to really make a story. Make your own story, not copy one from the book or copy one from the Kanji Kohi website. You want to make your own kanji story, and if you can, try to visualize a little story, and then fucking type that story out with your own fingers on your card. And doing this will really internalize it. And so, if you have a pre-made deck, it's really easy to skip over this because it's already there. You can. It's really easy to just be like, I don't know, skip, do a half-assed job, but when you really have to make your own cards, and it's not only that it forces you to be thorough, but they're your own cards. You start to, grow an attachment to them, and repping becomes more fun when they're like all your little babies, When it's someone else's cards I made for you, really, it feels like really dry flashcards. When you've made them all yourself, it's like every time you review one, you feel like you can feel all your hard work. You can feel how good a job you did. And so, this matters less with kanji. It's more important when you get to sentences to not use pre-made decks. But I would say, from day one, fuck anything pre-made. That's what me and all my friends. I've had friends that have used both, that have done pre-made and only make their own, and I have other friends that are like me, only make their own, and all our agreed opinion is that making your own works better. We're speculating why that is. That's what I just explained. But at the end of the day, everyone who's done it, their experience is that making your own cards works better for whatever reason. So, yeah, get the RTK book, read the introduction, and go slow. When I first did kanji, well, first of all, I did lazy kanji, which is a very bad idea because you will not learn how to actually write kanji, and you'll start to forget them all. But, so yeah, I would put English keyword on the front, kanji on the back. Your goal is to write it out. Actually write it out. Get a paper and actually write it out. Otherwise, you won't learn how to write, and you'll probably regret that later. And this way, it'll really stick in your memory. It'll be really good. And then go slow. Go at least for the first half. Don't do more than 15 a day. Yeah, you feel like you could do more, but I did 30 a day, and then I switched to 50 a day halfway through, and then once I finished them, they just all started falling out of my memory so fast. Eventually, I had to delete my first kanji deck and start a new one, after I was fluent. So I deleted my kanji deck. I could still read kanji, because after just going through RTK, even if you start to forget them, when you look at a kanji, you don't just see a blob of strokes anymore. You see, you can see the parts. It's more it's before it was just a blob, but now it has a face almost. You can recognize its face, even if you don't remember its name. It's kind of like that. So I was still I learned to read Japanese just by making cards that were recognition cards, but I couldn't write Japanese at all. I could still type, because obviously to type you don't need to be able, all you need to know is how to read it, because you just type the sounds. But I couldn't write almost anything out by hand for a long time, and then once I was almost fluent, then I started making a new kanji deck, the good old-fashioned way I'm telling you to do it now, and that solved all my problems. So I highly recommend just do it right the first time. You'll be really glad you did later, and because otherwise you're just gonna have to end up doing it all over again, like a lot of people do, and then it's a waste of time. You're just double the time, and it was unnecessary. So, yeah, English keyword on the front, thing on the back, really write it out by hand, do only 15 a day. Once you get halfway, maybe you can buy up to 30 a day. It'll still only take you, let's say, I won't do the calculation, but it should still only take a few months. 3 or 4, even 6 months. In the long term, it's really not a long time, especially if you're immersing at the same time. So, I would say, when you're doing kanji, you don't have to worry about active immersion that much, because I make this distinction between passive and active immersion. Where active immersion, you're sitting, and that's the activity you're doing. And passive is it's in the background, and you're listening. So you don't have to do active immersion, because it'll really be boring at the beginning, because you'll understand nothing, and you'll have nothing to, you'll have no reason to expect that you'll understand more one day than the next. It's if you're learning vocabulary words, even if you're a total noob, at least it's you have your new 10 vocabulary words to listen for. But you don't even have that because you're not learning any actual Japanese. You're just learning the alphabet. So that's a little hard. So I would say just focus on passive listening. So it'll still start the process of your mind, like learning to, decode it and to parse it. Because at the beginning, you're not even going to be able to tell when a word starts, when a word ends. But just by listening, just by having it in your ear, you don't have to listen, just by hearing it, you'll eventually get to the point where you can hear the individual words. And you'll even start to pick out certain words. You won't know what they mean maybe, but you'll know like, oh yeah, I know that. I've heard that word before. And then once you start learning the meanings, once you have, so like I have this this kind of conceptual model of a dictionary in your head. This goes with kanji too. So the way it works is you learn a word, and then and then you put it in your dictionary. So there's a slot in your dictionary of what it looks like, what it sounds like, and then what it means. And so there can be multiple things in multiple categories, like you can write the same kanji in different words sometimes. Like wakaru has like 3 different kanji. So there might be multiple kanji in how you write it. Some kanji, sometimes there's multiple readings for like the same word. Like sometimes there's variations, like josho and jocho. And like when there's the kanyo yomi. So there'll be multiple ones in that category. And then there's many, many times multiple meanings. But it's all under one category. It's all under one word in your brain. You have like these different words. So the hard part is making an entry in the dictionary in your head. Once you have the entry in your head, adding onto it is easy. So this is why Heisig works so well, because even if kanji have multiple meanings, they have multiple readings, and all you know is one meaning and how to write it, and that's it. So people think, oh yeah, but that's stupid because you don't know blah 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 blah. But the most important thing is you have an entry in your head, in your brain dictionary for every single Joyo kanji. So then once you have the entry, and it's easy to add on the reading, it's easy to add on the other meanings, because it's already there. Adding on is easy. What's hard is making the initial, entry. So the same thing is just by listening, you won't know what words mean, but you'll have entries for them in your dictionary. Like you'll hear a word like sumimasen or something, you may not know what it means, but you just made an entry in your head. You know that it exists, even if you don't know the meaning or how you write it. It's just a blank entry, but it's still an entry. And so later tacking on the meaning is going to be pretty effortless. It's going to stick more. It's very sticky once you already have the entry. So there's a lot of benefit in that. So I know it doesn't feel like it. You can't feel it, but passive listening will do well. So the first stage is you're doing the kanji, passive listening, and even if it takes you 6 months, great, because at the end of 6 months, you're gonna have already a good build-up of entries of Japanese words, and you'll have a solid foundation of kanji that won't be going anywhere. And you'll probably be really good at hiragana at that point. So then, we're gonna move on to grammar. So AJAT kind of says no grammar, but I think grammar is actually can be very useful. Now, not for outputting. I have already gone into detail about why knowing grammar rules will never help you output, because there's that gap between, that's conscious knowledge. Conscious knowledge never sinks to unconscious knowledge. But grammar can be a tool to help you understand things. Because remember, we acquire language when input is comprehensible. So anything that makes things more comprehensible is a tool. So for example, like if you're only listening to Japanese and there's no visual, very little is going to be comprehensible. But by adding a visual, like say instead of just listening to the anime, you're listening and you're watching the anime, then you can see what's going on. You'll have some context. So maybe if someone bumps into someone and then says sumimasen, you get a pretty good guess that either means sorry or excuse me or something like that. But if you weren't watching, you wouldn't know. So basically, there are certain clues that make things comprehensible. So grammar works the same way as a tool. You know how grammar rules work, so you read a sentence or you hear a sentence, then you remember the grammar rule, then the remembrance of the grammar rule basically works the same as having a visual. It instantly turns that comprehensible. So then you have the meaning of the word, and then you have the sentence, and then you can acquire it unconsciously. So you can do unconscious acquiring through the benefit of conscious grammar rules, if you can understand. So grammar rules can't help you output, but they can help you understand input. And so in that sense, they have great value. So I always use Tae Kim's grammar guide. Not always, I mean the one time I learned Japanese. I used Tae Kim's grammar guide. I went through it. I didn't pay attention to the details of the grammar rules. He has just his basic grammar guide. I didn't pay attention to like I didn't memorize the rules for how to conjugate verbs into te form. But I learned that verbs have a te form. They kind of look like this, and they kind of mean this. And then I made a sentence card for every single example sentence in all of Takem's Guide. And then on the back of the sentence, I would put the little grammar explanation and the vocab. And then when I reviewed them, I wouldn't read the grammar explanation if I didn't need to. So most of the time, I wouldn't. But basically, yeah, you want to make grammar cards. Sentence cards, which are just a sentence on the front, everything you need to understand it, and the reading on the back. So your goal is so the sentence is in full kanji. You want to use as much kanji as possible, because if you can, something like, even if it's a word that's normally written in hiragana, if you can read the kanji, you're going to be able to read the hiragana too, but it doesn't work the other way. Just because you read the hiragana doesn't mean you won't know the kanji in the rare case that the kanji does come up. So it's okay to convert things into kanji. Like, go out of your way to I know I did that and Katz did that, is even if you see a sentence, and for example, like made is just in hiragana like it is 99% of the time, it's okay to purposely change that to kanji just so that you get a practice for the 1% of the time that it is in kanji. But so you have the word in kanji, your goal is to read it out loud so you know the readings, and then to understand the sentence. So that includes all the individual words as well as the grammar and what's going on in the sentence as a whole. I made grammar. So what I would do is I go through Taken's grammar guide. If I were you, and I'd make sentence cards for all the example sentences, and that would be my foundation for bilingual sentences. So there's like 3 stages. First, bilingual sentences where you have an English translation for them. Like, it comes with the English translation. So that would be what this is. It's like, you see a sentence like, boku wa natto ga suki desu. And then you have like, I like natto. So it comes with the English translation. So that would be just the Taken's grammar guide is probably going to be enough to finish that stage. Then you go on to taking sentences from actual, like, Japanese media. So you don't get sentence packs or anything anymore. It's like you're reading real manga, you're watching real anime with subtitles, or you're surfing the net, you're reading YouTube comments in Japanese. You're finding I+1 sentences. So sentences where you understand all of it but one word. And it looks like if you just look at that one word, then you could understand it. Because if there's 2 words, that's too much. Because when you're reviewing, it doesn't... You learn fastest with I+1. When I was at the beginning, I tried to do I+3 and I+4 sentences, but it's really just a headache. You end up confusing them all, and it's really not worth it. So I+1 is really the way to go. So you want to be sentence mining. You're on the lookout for the perfect sentence where it's like you almost understand it, but there's just one little word sticking out. And then you look that up in the English to Japanese, the Japanese to English dictionary, put the English definition on the back, and then if it makes sense, then you're good. And if it doesn't make sense, then just throw it out. Never add a card you don't understand. I know it's tempting. You're like, oh yeah, I pretty much understand it. No, if you don't 100% get it, then just throw it out. And don't worry about it. Because there's, just the way that it works is, I know it's hard to accept, but, there will be something that you can understand. Something new. And there always will be. And if you just keep chasing the few things you always understand, then before you know it, that thing that didn't make sense a while ago will just magically make sense one day. It feels like magic, but it's really not, because even if you're taking tiny steps, eventually you get there. It doesn't seem like it. It seems like, no, I have to get this sentence. Let me ask someone who's fluent for help. Let me put it on, ask a Google, search Google for details on this grammar thing. It's yeah, if you do that, you'll end up with the understanding of that sentence, but you'll have wasted a lot of time. Whereas it's unnecessary. If you just search for those few sentences that you totally understand, those will be enough to get you there, and that's the quickest path. So how it's going to be is you're going to look for sentences, and then you're going to find a bunch that look really good. And then you're going to take one of the ones that look really good, and then within those few that so it's out of a whole paragraph, right? There might be one sentence that looks really good. But even out of those 10 of those really good sentences, maybe only 1 out of 10 will actually turn out to be a good card. Because after you look it up, it'll all make sense. There'll be cards where you'll look up every word in the sentence, and still the whole thing doesn't make sense. And it's going to be frustrating, but you just got to just let it go and not chase after it. Chasing after things, well, it's just a waste of time, and it leads to more frustration. Because then if you don't get it after you've spent half an hour trying to figure it out, then you feel even worse. So just spend a minute trying to figure it out, look up the word, and if you don't get it, just let it go. It's not worth it. It's really not worth it. And so, yeah, it's going to be hard to find a lot of sentences, you know? Like, you can do, like 10 a day is plenty. I did 10 a day for almost my whole AJAT career. Like, it builds up over time. Like, I was doing 10 a day, and I got to the point where my vocabulary was bigger than most natives, right? So, there's no need to strive and try to do, like 15's fine. But I would say 20, 25, 30, that's a lot, and it's going to make your reviews pile up. And once your reviews are piling up, then you're really going to, it's going to bite you in the butt. So I would say consistency rules over everything else. Like, instead of doing 30 and then doing 0 the next day because you burned out, just do 10 every day. It's better. And it's maintainable. And, and then one other thing about doing reps is, so obviously you got to be reviewing all these cards. You're still reviewing your kanji cards too. Now, you really got to review every single day. It's crucial, because, I mean, the algorithm shows you things right before it thinks you're going to forget them. So if you don't review, you're going to forget them. And so what I always did was, I'd always keep a strict sleep schedule, and I'd always do them first thing when I wake up. Because, I mean, if you know you have to do them, then, I mean, it's just always on your head, and it's always just there, you know? And so, and it's really annoying, knowing, like, oh, I have to do my reps, you keep procrastinating. So in order to avoid that, I would just wake up, and I do all my reps first thing. And that once that became a real habit, it was totally effortless, and it served me really well for almost my entire AJAT career. Because it was just a habit. Get up, shower, and reps until they're done. And once that became effortless, it was just wonderful because, I mean, then I'd be free for the rest of the day, and I would never have to worry about it. So, I mean, I complained about my SRS later, but that's because I started making bad cards that took too much effort. And I had too many cards, so it took me so long, you know. And so I ended up not being able to. I lost that habit in the end, and I really regretted that. So, I mean, obviously, some people just cannot keep a consistent sleep schedule, but I mean, AJAT covers your whole life, so I would consider that part of AJAT. You know, trying to really nail that down. But I mean, if you can, or it's not for you, then whatever, you have to make it work. But I would highly recommend, you know, making a habit of getting up early. I always got up early and getting those reps done. And really be strict about it. It's like if you can't make new cards one day, that's fine. Just don't skip your reps. Because, you know, that's what's stopping you from making reverse progress. It's like, even if you can't make new progress, don't take a step backwards. That's the last thing you want to do. Even if you have a few days where you don't take new steps, as long as you don't take backwards, you will get there eventually. But the SRS is the whole plugging up the bucket, right? If you don't have that, your bucket's going to be leaking all the time, and then it's just one step forward, 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, and you want to avoid that. So always review, make that first. Never make new cards before reviewing. Review first, then you can make your new cards later. So I would always review in the morning, and then I make my new cards later in the day. And the way I did it was I would just first I'd just immerse, right? I just read manga, I'd watch anime with the Japanese subtitles, I'd read the internet, and I'd open like a Word document, and I'd keep all of my sentences in the Word document. And then at the end of the day, I like all my I+1 sentences, because it's like you're mining for gold, right? You want to. It's going to take a while to build up a real collection of good-looking sentences that are I+1. And then I would have sentence time where I'd take a good-looking sentence, try to look up the word, try to figure it out. But it didn't look good, delete it. If it did look good, cool, make a card. And I try to make around 10. But I mean, if I didn't have enough cards, I wouldn't stress it. Wouldn't go out of my way to try to look for it. And so that was like my strategy was. So I'd wake up, take a shower, do my reps. And then I'd go about my day, always doing passive immersion. Whenever I had a chance, I'd do as much like watching and reading as I could. At the beginning, I did mostly watching, because when you understand almost nothing, reading manga sucks, and novels are out of the question. And so, but anime is still kind of entertaining, because even if you don't understand it, I mean, you can still watch, so you can still follow the story. It's okay. And so. And most of my immersion at the beginning was anime, like with Japanese subtitles. I have a video on how to set all that up on my channel. and that's good because you can copy and paste to make sentences. And so I'd actively watch as many episodes as I could in a day. Later on, I try to balance watching and reading, so like maybe 50-50. And in the end, later I tried to do more like 2/3 reading, 1/3 watching. But it's whatever level you at, like you gotta balance that. And then and then later at like in the evening, I'd have my card making time. And so that was kind of my schedule. As much time as possible, and you'll progress faster. And so then you want to go bilingual as soon as you can. But I had a really hard time doing that. But I have a video about how I ended up doing it successfully. And you could probably do it after maybe 2,000 bilingual cards, more or less. I mean, you don't have to rush to it, but don't wait too long. And if you do it in the method I show you, you should be able to do it pretty early. So yeah, do that. And going bilingual is really awesome because then, you learn Japanese in Japanese. Like you have the Japanese cards with the Japanese definitions on the back, and then you really, like English is nowhere in the process. So it's very self-enforcing, It's like reading the definition to figure out what the word meant is also Japanese practice in itself. So it's like really... And it gives you a very deep understanding for Japanese, seeing how it's defined in itself. Like I realized from learning Japanese that my understanding of English is very vague. Like for most words, if you told me define this word, I could give you like a vague description, but I couldn't really like nail it down. Whereas in Japanese, because I learned my words with an SRS through a definition, for almost any Japanese word I know, I can like give you the exact definition of it, and it's really cool. So my knowledge of Japanese is very exact. And because of that, like when I read philosophy, it's actually easier to read philosophy in Japanese than in English because, philosophy is very technical and hard to understand. So with my vague understanding of English, it's actually it takes a lot of concentration and I'm kind of slow and it's very difficult. But in Japanese, since my understanding is so exact, it's actually quite like matter of fact and easy. And I think that's definitely from the practice of reading dealing with monolingual definitions so much. You see how the language defines itself. And the other thing is literally every aspect of the Japanese language, classical and modern, is in the monolingual dictionary. You just have to know how to search for it. So you'll get better over time of learning how to search for things. Like even all of grammar, not only vocab, but all of grammar is in the dictionary if you know how to search for the individual parts of it, and the explanations will be in the dictionary. So it's pretty awesome. Like I even thought you could learn biology in the dictionary because every single vocabulary word in biology is in there with an explanation of it. So if you I taught myself a lot of stuff unrelated not even directly related to language with the monolingual dictionary, just because it's basically an encyclopedia in a way. So learning to use it is definitely worth it. I have that video on how to get multiple dictionaries and stuff. So I think for the most part, that's the practice. I kind of assumed a basic knowledge of AJAT throughout that. So if anything didn't make sense, if you read the table of contents, it should make sense. And when you add it together. And and so I guess with regards to outputting, so you're really, it starts to come naturally. So you'll want to start with typing, because obviously typing is easier than speaking, because you got your time to really think it out. And so at the beginning, you want to be really slow. Anti-Moon has a lot of stuff on how to start outputting, where you, like you said, you should aim for no mistakes. So if you're not confident that you could type something perfect with no mistakes, then it's too soon for you. So people always are like, when should I output? When should I output? It could be two whole years. Most likely one year on average, probably. Depending on how good you are at pattern recognition and it's kind of a skill of saying what you know how to say instead of saying what you really want to say. If you're good at that, you can start pretty early. You could start from if you're really clever in only using what you know, you can start pretty early, and that's what it's about. So if you're waiting until you can say exactly everything you say exactly as you want it, that'll probably never happen, because Japanese people say different stuff than American people. They don't say the same stuff, so you'll never be able to you have to learn to adjust to think in a Japanese way, which will happen by itself naturally too. But it's really just, it's not the kind of thing you can rush. So I wouldn't worry about it. I would wait until it kind of comes naturally, because it will. And it takes everyone at different amounts of time, so I really wouldn't stress that. And let's see, there was one other thing I wanted to talk, like a second ago, popped into my head. Oh yeah, so like for me, it was really hard to learn how to read novels. Like I could read manga, I could watch anime, but at first, learning to read novels was like very difficult because there was just so many words I didn't know. There's a lot of words that are only used in novels and not used anywhere else. So it was like there was this big barrier to, no matter how good I got at everything else, I couldn't read novels. But basically the only solution is to just, brute force. Like make a lot of SRS cards. And you don't have to make many per day, just open a novel. Like what I did is I opened a light novel I wanted to read, and I would just memorize every single new word that came up. And it felt like it would take forever. I'm like, okay, at this rate, it's going to take me 3 years to just get through this one novel. But it's not as intimidating as you think. Like you start, once you get there's kind of this peak, where once you hit the peak, then you realize you've learned enough where it's not intimidating anymore. And okay, and there's one other very important principle that I just remembered that I came up with, which is when you're making sentences and you're choosing words, right? At the beginning, there's going to be too many words to learn all of them. And this also goes to it kind of contradicts what I just said, but this give this principle priority as much as you can. So there's going to be too many words to try to learn every single one that comes up that you don't know. Like there's going to be, once you get at the beginning, there's going to be, at the very beginning, I+1 sentences are going to be very rare. But once you become more intermediate, there's going to be I+1 sentences everywhere to the point where you can't learn them all. There's too many. Because what you've understood has increased, so you're at that point where I+1 sentences are more common. So what you want to start doing is only learn words you've seen twice. So if you see a word, if you come across a new word, an I+1 sentence, and you look at the word and it's like, you have this feeling of no, I've never seen this before, this is brand new. Then skip it and go on. But if you come across it and you're like, oh, I've seen this somewhere before, then add that to your list of ones to learn. Because there'll be like I said, there's too many to learn all of them, so you want to learn the most important ones. And the most important ones are the ones that are most common, because those will give you the most value, because those will increase your comprehension the most. So they're more important to learn. So an easy way to know whether a word is worth learning or not is just if you've seen it. Because if you feel like you've seen it more than once, then in reality you've probably seen it not just twice but multiple times, and that means that it's relatively common, which means it has value. And so there's just one other concept I just remembered that I kind of thought of is like when you talk about difficulty of words, a word isn't really hard because the meaning is complicated. A word is hard because it's not very commonly used. Like in Japanese, it's probably the same case in every language, but I only know for sure in Japanese because it's the only language I've learned consciously. There's many words that mean like the exact same thing, like many words, but the flavor of the word is different. It's like the meaning is same, but the flavor is different. So it's like in Japanese, there's a lot of different like character ways of talking. There'll be like an old man talk, there'll be like young girl talk, there'll be like big sister talk, and there's a million different ways of talking. And there's like literature talk, and there's different types of literature talk. There's like history talk, and so there'll be a concept. Like say like to like one word that's really common is like tamera. What would you say that in English? Like to hesitate. There's like a million words that mean to hesitate, and the definition is literally identical, like in all the words. Just there'll be all these different variations of it depending on the flavor. So you reach a certain point where you've almost seen every possible word. You're just learning new flavors of words you already know. So once you hit that point, then improving becomes really easy because you look at the definition and you've already seen it before in another word. You're like, oh, so it's just one of those. You like put it into categories. And so once you hit that point, it's really easy to learn new words just because, you almost have a category for that kind, Like I said, you have categories in your head. And so So yeah, so I'm not sure where I was gonna go with that, but I mean, yeah. So things get easier over time, but oh yeah. I forgot. I remember what I was saying. So yeah. So a lot of times when people say a hard word, like what they really mean is like if you use it in a conversation, they'd be impressed. If you understood it, they'd be impressed. What they mean is that the word itself isn't hard. It's rare. So it could be like I said, there's many words for say to hesitate, but some of them are very easy, meaning common, meaning you see them all the time, so there's no way you don't know it, to ones that are very rare, like only used in old literature. So it's not that it's hard, meaning the meaning is hard, right? Because the meaning is the same as an easy word. It's hard because it's rare, you know? And it's the same thing with English, right? Like when we think of hard words, what we really mean is big words, right? Like the definition of the word isn't hard, it's just uncommon and it's long. So it sounds intelligent or like hard or whatever you want to put. When you think about it, the meaning isn't hard. That's not, like actually the hardest words to understand meaning-wise are actually the easiest words because they're common, they're all over the place. Like yup buddy, like that's a word you'll hear all the time, but it's going to take you a long time to really grasp the meaning because there's no way to define it. It's so simple. It's hard to actually, like the definition, the more simple a word, the more complicated the definition. Just that's the nature of language, you know? I talk about that in my monolingual dictionary video. So the hardest words are actually the easiest words, if you know what I mean, meaning the most common words and the ones you're going to come across early on. So that's kind of how, so yeah, you want to be thinking not in terms of hard or easy, but in terms of how common something is. And the value of a word is, like what determines the value is how much it's going to increase your comprehension, which is how common it is. So basically hard words or uncommon words at the beginning are, for the most part, a waste of your time. You want to avoid them. But like I said, when it comes to sometimes, and the only exception to this rule is when you're reading a novel where there's just so many words you don't know. The only way to break through sometimes is to just go brute force and memorize every single word for a while. Once you break over the barrier, then you want to return to the principle of only learn things that you've seen twice. And then once you get to a certain point, those words you'll have learned all those words, and your only way, and then you can start learning every single word you come across. So it's fun when you reach this point because it's like very freeing. It's like finally, it's like you feel like you can finally see the end of the road, you know? Because it's like at first it's so far that there's just so many words you don't know. You can't. There's too many, so you can only do ones that are within those, the common ones. But then you learn all those, so then you can start actually on the rare ones. And then it gets to the point where finding new words are so rare that it excites you when you find them. Like for me, when I'm reading a novel and I find a new kanji, I feel like I just found a treasure chest. Like I found that piece of gold. And I get really excited, and I'm excited to learn it because it's so rare, you know. And it piques your curiosity, right? It's like I've been reading so much Japanese and I've still never seen this. What could it possibly be? And it's like kind of piques your curiosity, right? So once you can get there, so really it's like the farther you go, the easier it is to go to a certain extent. The easier it is to go. But like I said, the most fun part of the entire process is the middle part, probably like when you first go bilingual or monolingual. Like around then, like when you first, or maybe from the section where when you first start being able to, like when you're still learning words that are common, like around that area is probably the most fun because you're improving all the time. You can feel your improvement, you know, like you learned a word in the morning, and then you know you see it in the afternoon in an anime, and then you just have this feeling like, wow, I'm literally better than I was yesterday. If it was yesterday, I wouldn't have understood this, but today I did. And even just listening to anime, you know, it's like you've already watched the anime, but you'll understand parts of it for the first time, like when you're only half listening. Like you'll be like cooking, half listening, and then something will pop in, and you'll be like, oh, that's what he said then. And so it's just like, and that can happen to you at all times of the day. So once you really break out of the beginning part, and it's like obviously in the kanji, progress is slow as shit, if any, and in the beginning it's really slow, but you get to this point where it's just like so fun because you're improving all the time. You know, you feel like you're on steroids, and it's like a really great feeling. It's super fun, and it really doesn't matter if the anime you're watching is fun or not because it's gonna power you up nonetheless. Whereas once you get fluent, you know, you have to rely on entertaining shows because, you know, there's not very much left to learn. So the show has to entertain you because Japanese itself can't. So yeah, I think those are all the main points I wanted to make with regards to basic Ajax technique. Then I have, these are my a few personal additions. So one of them, I guess, with regards to pitch accent, whether you should consciously learn pitch accent or not. So Katsumoto would just say no. But I mean, at the end of the day, Katsumoto's accent is isn't 100% perfect. And, I mean, so basically, when you look up a word in the English dictionary, look, so it's like in English we have a strength accent, you know? So it's like we say doctor, not doctor. Or like a metaphor, not a metaphor. And so if you get the accent wrong, it can change the meaning of the word. And even if we know what you mean, it'll sound really awkward and weird. So it's in order to pronounce a word correctly, you need to know not only the pronunciation, but the strength. And so in Japanese, it's the same. Every word has an accent in addition to the pronunciation. And if you don't know that accent, you pretty much don't know how to pronounce the word. If you only know the hiragana of a Japanese word, then that's basically like saying you don't know whether it's doctor or doctor. So you literally don't know how to pronounce it. You can only make a guess. And this is, for some reason, the reason why no one talks about this is because they assume that you're never going to get good anyway, so it's not going to matter. They're like, you're going to suck anyway, so you might as well not worry about these little details. And the other thing is, they'll still understand you, even if you mess up your pitch accent. They really will. So if your goal is just to be understood, which the goal of most textbooks and classes are, right, to just somehow communicate, then yeah, it doesn't matter. It's not like Chinese, where if you mess up the tones, they literally won't understand you. But if you want to sound 100% native, which your goal should be, well, okay, maybe not should be, but if it is, then you're going to end up worrying about this stuff, and the sooner you start, the better. So it's like you're learning all. So I would say, if you're like a really raw beginner, then I wouldn't. But at least around the time you start going monolingual, I would start learning about the basics. I would learn the basics of pitch accent. Basically, what pitch accent is. You know, what are the possibilities? Like, it's not very complicated. Basically, the pitch accent of a word can be represented in a single number. You know. And the possibilities of the number are one more than the number of syllables. So if it's a 2-syllable word, there's only 3 possibilities, and so it's either going to be 0, 1, or 2. And so it's a single number. So you might as well, every time you learn a word, right, you learn the hiragana, so you might as well learn the accent too. It's just a single number. It's just a hiragana and a number. And the more you learn pitch accents, the more intuitive they become, the more patterns you start to recognize, and it's like you start to be able to guess them, even without looking at the number, and the number is just like, just to confirm. And the thing is, when you start doing this, you start to hear them too. Like, I realized when I first started worrying about pitch, I realized that I wasn't hearing pitch accents. You know, like the word for bridge and the word for edge are the same sound the same literally when they're pronounced in isolation. Like, they're both hashi, but when you put a da at the end, then they're different. One's hashida, one's hashida. And I realized that my brain did not hear that. My brain did not listen for that. My brain didn't pay attention to what the accent was of the thing following the word. And I realized it was never going to start listening until, like, at that rate. And so you kind of gotta, like, when you're paying attention to it, I think it's kind of similar to how knowing grammar rules can help you, not with output, but they can help you with acquire your input. It's the same way, like, memorizing rules about pitch accent isn't going to help you directly, like, because it's too much to think about, right? Like, when I'm speaking Japanese, I don't have time to think about what the pitch accents of words are. It doesn't work like that. Speaking is unconscious. But if you are aware of pitch accents, then you will start to hear them more when you listen to Japanese. Like, ever since I started studying pitch accents, I started to notice them naturally. Like, I wasn't even looking for it. I was just more aware of it. I kind of had an intent to hear it, but I hear a phrase and I just noticed, like, oh wow, that was a type 1. Like, that dropped in between, like usoda. I was like, oh wow, I heard that. Like, it went uso, and there's a drop in between the two. I never noticed before. And so it's all about noticing, right? It's like you acquire what you notice. And I have a new video about kind of goes into the details about noticing and how to pay attention. But this is one of the things you should be paying attention to consciously, because consciously paying attention will lead you to unconsciously acquire it. That's just how it works. Like, and so the earlier you start this process, the better. And it's really not that difficult. So I don't get why everyone has so much aversion to it. I think everyone's just lazy. They don't want to change their ways. Like, maybe it's because I first started learning about pitch accent not too long ago, and I started telling everyone about it, and some people were very excited, but most people were not very excited. And I think the reason why was because they have already been learning Japanese for a long time. They didn't want to go back and relearn a bunch of aspects of stuff they'd skipped over because they didn't know the pitches of words. They didn't want to start worrying about it. They already had their whole method in place. They didn't want to have to redo stuff. They didn't want another thing to worry about. But maybe if you were really starting fresh and you really, if you had this in mind from day one, it wouldn't be such a big deal. It's like that's what happens in Chinese, right? People who learn Chinese, they learn the tone of words. And like when you think about it, so yeah, you need to know the tones in Chinese to even communicate, and you don't need the pitches to communicate in Japanese. But if your goal is to sound 100% native, then they're equally difficult and they're equally important because you have to sound literally perfect to sound like a native. So what Chinese speakers do is they're consciously aware of it all the time, right? But then somehow at the final result is that they're able to speak with tones and they don't have to consciously worry about it, just like natives. Like I know Chinese learners who are at that point. And I think because of that, so because Chinese learners always are worried about tones, then like once they get really fluent, they sound pretty much native. Like I know a lot of I know a couple of like American or like English speaking Chinese learners who apparently actually sound native to Chinese people. But I don't know anyone in Japanese who is the case who follows this case. And I think it's because they're worrying about their pitch, but we're not worrying about ours. So just the fact that you're worrying about it leads to unconscious acquiring is my theory. And it would make sense looking at the Chinese learners. So the better you start, the earlier. Chinese people start from day one. I'm not saying start from day one, but start as early as you can. Unless you never care about having a good accent. The later you start, the harder it's going to be. And another thing about, another interesting kind of idea I had is, like, at one point I was actually memorizing the faces of celebrities. Like, I made Anki cards where I had a celebrity on the front, and a celebrity's face on the front, and the goal was to say their name. And you might think this is really stupid and pointless, but if you think about it, like in English, everyone knows Brad Pitt's name. Like, literally. And people will bring it up in conversation. Like, I heard someone say, like, yeah, you'd have to be Brad Pitt to blah, 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 meaning you'd have to be really famous and rich and good looking. And so, in that case, Brad Pitt is basically just an English word, A word is something that has meaning and pretty much everyone understands. So, just because celebrities aren't in the dictionary, and they're not technically a word, right? If it's something that everyone understands and occasionally shows up in conversation, then it's just as important as literally any other word. So, like, Japanese people bring up celebrities in conversation all the time. When they're describing what someone looks like, they'll say, oh, like, what celebrity they look like. When they're asking what kind of the opposite gender or opposite sex they're into, what kind of face, they'll use a celebrity. And a lot of times they'll just talk about gossip, and it's expected that you'll know that stuff if you're Japanese. So if you really want to be native level, or not even that, like if you want to be able to communicate as skillfully as possible with Japanese people, then knowing this stuff is a big help. And it helped me directly. Like there are a lot of times where I remember I heard like Japanese people would mention celebrities in a conversation that I only knew because I made the cards for it, and that was the only way I remembered because I was bad at remembering Japanese names. And also just the act of making cards for Japanese names or Japanese celebrities made me better at remembering names in general, because that's basically what I was doing, right? I was practicing it, so it helped with when I met people in real life. But it's not just that, right? Like I made cards for a lot of random things, like to memorize like holidays in Japan, and like I made cards to memorize all the prefectures in Japan, like maps where you had a map and then like a dot on one of the prefectures, and it said like what prefecture is this, and another one where it said point to Yamaguchi prefecture or something like that. And I also memorized all the wards of Tokyo, because this is all common knowledge in Japan. And also, like, when you're reading a Japanese book, they're going to talk about places in Japan. And if you don't know the map of Japan in your head, at least roughly, it's hard to tell what's actually going on. You can't even follow the story sometimes. So it's like all these things outside of language that, at the end of the day, the only people who speak Japanese are Japanese people. So the point of learning Japanese is to understand things written by Japanese people. And Japanese people have this common assumed knowledge. Even if you don't want to talk to them, even if you just want to watch anime, right? A lot of times they're going to be mentioning, like, if you don't know at least the basics of Tokyo, you're not going to be able to follow. So I'd say it's good to be ready to learn a lot of stuff that's not strictly language, because at the end of the day, it's just as important and will help you just as much. Now, of course, this is not the kind of thing you worry about as a beginner. It's the kind of thing that you worry about when you get more advanced, but it's just something that I've thought a lot about, but not heard anyone else talk about. But I think when we're talking about native level, that's really a factor you got to take in is cultural knowledge, and I always made cards for that. Japanese history as well, because it comes up a lot. Like, it's referenced a lot all the time. Like, certain events in Japanese history, they'll say in real life and in anime and in drama and movies, well, this is like blah 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 event in Japanese history. And so if you want to be able to relate with Japanese people, understand what they're saying, you have to know that event in Japanese history. So, I mean, I spent a lot of time studying Japanese history, and I think, depending on your level of commitment, that's definitely something, part of AJAT. And, yeah, so then lastly, I mentioned meditation a little bit in my video that I just made, but I really think that, I didn't get into meditation until pretty recently, but I realized, if you could meditate a half an hour a day, or preferably an hour a day, that would really not only help you in Japanese, but it would really help you everywhere in life. And the biggest thing is this idea of equanimity. Meditation really builds equanimity, which is really it's a lack of preference for pleasure or pain in a way. Now, when I say, I don't really mean pain, but you could say fun or boredom, right? So the whole philosophy of AJAT is has to be really fun, because we have low willpower, and sometimes the necessity to make things fun is actually inhibits you. It's annoying. You always have to be on the lookout for new shows, trying to find new things to download, and it's a lot of stress sometimes. But if you had equanimity, that would mean that you could. The more equanimity you had, the more a boring show would entertain you just as much as a fun show. Now, that sounds extreme, but say if the boringness is from a 1 to 10, normally it'd have to be an 8 show at least to keep you entertained. But if you improve equanimity, you could get to the point where even a 6 show could entertain you. So from a language learner point of view, that would be a huge benefit. It's basically free will. It's basically getting more willpower, right? Because you need willpower when you're fighting something. So the more equanimity you have, the less you'd be fighting. The more you'd be okay with the situation how it was, even if it wasn't perfect. So that would be huge if you're an AJATer, because there's gonna be a lot of times that aren't totally pleasant. You're always gonna be sometimes wishing that you understood more. You're gonna be upset that you don't, that your lack of understanding, how far you have to go. And the things are gonna be boring at times. You're gonna get tired, and so the skill of equanimity would really help. And also concentration. So I talked in my other video, you don't realize how bad and how shitty of an attention span you have and how shitty your concentration abilities are, and if you've never meditated. If you just try to focus on your breath, you'll really realize how it's just, you realize that it's a skill that you could develop and would help you everywhere in life, but you haven't ever, and at this point, you're at level 0 in terms of concentration. And so this would help so much in Japanese, just because when I'm talking about things like paying attention to little details, picking up pitch accents through listening, acquiring as much as possible, the more concentrated you are, the more you're gonna the more it's gonna raise the quality of your input. It's how I said in my previous video. Every minute you spend immersing, you will get more out of it. So it just makes sense to have this commitment of to make the investment of starting a meditation practice at the beginning of learning AJAT, because once you have your concentration and your equanimity up, it's going to help you every single day after. So you're going to, in the long run, it's going to make you grow exponentially faster. So it's a little initial investment that's going to come back big time, and it's going to help you everywhere else in your life, not just meditation. And it also just helps you deal with stress and stuff. It's a perfect outlet for cooling off steam and stuff. So it's really the kind of thing once you really figure out what meditation is, and if you try it, you kind of realize that this is one of those other earth flat things in a way where it's in the future everyone's going to be meditating. It's going to be you're either going to be meditating or feeling guilty that you're not. It's just like exercise now. Pretty much everyone in our society either exercises regularly or feels bad about themselves that they don't. Though I'm sure there's exceptions, but it's because since we understand the benefits of exercise, it's natural that we feel that way. So once we fully understand the benefits of meditation, it'll be the same thing. And of course, I didn't make that up. Other people have said that, and it is growing. But I would jump on that train as quick as I can if I were you. because you're just really ripping yourself off not doing that. It's free, and it's going to bring you so many benefits. I would recommend the book The Mind Illuminated. It's probably the most, comprehensive, down-to-earth manual of how to get started, how to make progress. But I would highly recommend that, whether you're going to do AJAT or not. It's like, if I have one thing, I recommend meditating way more than I recommend AJAT. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Just at 3 hours. That went by really fast. If you made it all the way here, I'd say good job, but I don't even know. I mean, if you're a true AJATer, in a way, you should feel guilty for listening to me speak English for 3 hours. But I give you permission to not feel guilt. This is an exception, because you could benefit from this. It's just like reading the AJAT site, You can't feel guilty for reading the AJAT site, even if it's in English, because it's going to help you. So, yeah, I guess this is Matt vs. Japan signing out.